If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 99. The strangeness brought by Fern. Frieren couldn't help but feel genuinely worried about Fern's physical condition. However, the racial differences between them made Frieren entirely unaware of her concerns. Fern, on the other hand, chose not to dwell on it. She focused on herself, wrapping her arms around Ash as she basked in his warmth against the biting wind and snow. Her demeanor, simultaneously independent yet reliant, gave her the aura of both a caring mother and a petulant eldest daughter. After all, Frieren had earlier said something that irritated Fern, so she was naturally content now. In stark contrast, Ash's mood was entirely different. "This is bad. I can't feel my heartbeat at all. Is the difference between people really this vast?" The firm yet incomparably soft sensation pressing against his back made it impossible for him to describe his feelings. A strange, subtle emotion he couldn't quite name began creeping into his thoughts. Despite his best efforts to ignore it, the overwhelming sensation was too vivid to dismiss. The more he felt it, the more a peculiar sense of guilt grew within him, making him feel oddly conflicted. His silence in the midst of the howling snowstorm didn't escape Fern's notice. Concerned, Fern leaned forward slightly and asked, "Master Ash? Am I really too heavy?" "No, that's not it," Ash quickly replied. "Really? Quote, I was just thinking. You said you'd always stand by me, but then you suddenly said you'd die with me. Sigh tilde as expected, as an old father, I'm very sad tilde." Of course, he couldn't possibly say what was truly on his mind. So, he feigned a wistful sigh as he looked ahead into the swirling snow. Fern flushed with embarrassment, resting her chin on Ash's shoulder as he mumbled, that was just a joke." "Oh, so you'll stand by me, then?" "No, I meant what I said. We'd die together." "That doesn't sound like a joke at all." Quote, "Because," Fern tightened his hold around Ash's neck, whispering near his ear as if sulking, "I'd really be upset." Ash sighed inwardly. Why did girls care so much about their weight? He didn't understand it, not even a little. The only thing he was sure of was that girls' moods could shift faster than the northern winds. Unconsciously, he glanced up at the stormy sky, sighing again, his breath visible in the freezing air. The world around them was a vast expanse of white, ravaged by relentless wind and snow. Snowflakes, thick and fast, poured from the heavens like feathers, blanketing the earth in silver and obscuring their vision. The howling wind tore through the landscape like a wild beast, seeking to devour every ounce of warmth. Behind Ash, the girl's long, violet hair danced with the tempest, brushing against him and carrying a faint, enticing scent. It wasn't just the smell of shampoo or perfume. It was something deeper, something closer to the sweet temptation of natural hormones. The realization made Ash's already unsettled thoughts spiral further. "Why can I even smell this?" he wondered. "I'm a demon, after all." Then again, animals could sense human auras too, couldn't they? The difference between species didn't seem as significant as he once thought. Of course, different creatures probably experience different hormonal reactions to one another, but this wasn't the time to dissect such matters. Still, Fern is so big. No, stop, I need to block these thoughts out. Am I a pervert? The one behind me is Fern. I watched her grow up. She's just a human who'll pass away in the blink of an eye. As the storm raged around them, Ash wrestled silently with his thoughts, berating and blaming himself for feelings he couldn't quite suppress. Fern clung to Ash's back, not only hugging him tightly but also gently resting her head on Ash's shoulder, savoring the warmth amidst the wind and snow. Her quiet gaze lingered on Ash's face as if trying to discern his thoughts. Unable to contain her curiosity, he finally asked, "Master Ash, what's wrong? Are you worried about getting lost?" "Ah, yes, that's it," Ash replied evasively. "You're lying to me again." Fern narrowed her eyes in suspicion, her expression tinged with dissatisfaction. "Why do you have so many things you won't tell me? I decided a long time ago that I would always be your helper, but you. I'm very grateful for your trust and support, Fern, but life is full of complications. Even the closest people hide small secrets from each other, don't they?" Quote, "I don't hide anything, Master Ash. That's not fair, really? Really? I'll tell you anything you want to know. The weather is nice today." Quote, Ash's deflection was as smooth as it was transparent. Gazing ahead at the snowstorm battering their path, he muttered softly, "Maybe tomorrow, it will be as peaceful as it is now. Quote. Fern raised her head, her disbelief evident. I'm surprised you can say something like that while looking at this blizzard. Quote. The endless snowflakes, swept by the howling wind, surged like waves in a stormy sea. Fern instinctively shrank against Ash's back for warmth, but still managed to bump her forehead against Ash's shoulder. Why does he think this is no big deal? Isn't this weather terrible? Fern couldn't help but wonder, shivering slightly. Meanwhile, Ash, as a warrior, remained unfazed. He wasn't one to complain about a little snow. His clothes left a hollow space at his back, which provided unexpected warmth. Combined with Fern presence, which brought a subtle, pleasant fragrance, he found the experience oddly comfortable. Especially now that Fern had grown older, moments of such closeness had become rare. Far from complaining, Ash found himself hoping the snowstorm would last a little longer. Clearing his mind of distractions, he even began to pray silently for the blizzard to persist. Fern, though she occasionally grumbled, seemed equally content. Resting peacefully against Ash's back, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to relax. The harsh environment didn't seem to bother her much. In fact, a small part of her was looking forward to tomorrow, hoping the snowstorm would continue. But not everyone shared their perspective. Following behind them, Frieren had a far different experience. She trudged along, hunched over and trembling, her face pale as she cursed the cold. Really? I'm going to die. Why is it that, after all these years, the snowstorm here still feels so cold? No, it's definitely colder than before. Her voice quivered as much as her body. With her hands tucked deep into her sleeves and her posture curled up like a frozen shrimp, Frieren could barely manage her complaints. Instead of worrying about Fern catching a fever, she was far more concerned about whether she might freeze to death. A pang of regret struck her. Why did I let Ash carry me earlier? She thought bitterly. The fleeting warmth had only made the cold that followed feel even harsher. It was as painful as waking up in the middle of a winter night to use the bathroom. Apart from the relentless howl of the wind and the crunch of footsteps on snow, silence blanketed the white wasteland. In this vast, frozen world, it seemed as though only Ash and Fern existed. Isolated yet deeply connected, their presence brought a sense of solace amidst the desolation. Even though the environment was harsh, the warmth Fern radiated from behind gave Ash an odd sense of comfort. But still, something felt a little off. The storm may have muted many sounds, but the atmosphere between them was too quiet, too harmonious. Come to think of it, I feel like I've forgotten something, Ash muttered to himself, his instincts tugging at him. He glanced around cautiously, scanning the endless expanse of white. What's missing? Did we lose Frieren? Fern suddenly jolted awake from her thoughts, her voice tinged with panic. At that exact moment, Ash realized who they had unintentionally left behind. Frieren, who should have called out for a turn to rest by now, was unnervingly silent. When Ash glanced back, the familiar figure was nowhere to be seen. Fern anxiously scanned their surroundings, her voice trembling. What should we do, Master Ash? Lady Frieren must have fallen behind somewhere. Calm down, Fern. Even though she's terrified of the cold, she's not that fragile. She won't die so easily. Quote. Please don't say such things at a time like this. Lady Frieren, where are you? If you can hear me, please respond. Quote. Fern's desperate shouts were swallowed by the howling wind and snow, leaving no trace of an answer. The blizzard's intensity rendered visibility abysmally low. The world beyond a few meters was obscured by swirling snow, making it impossible to spot any movement. Ash frowned, his mind racing. If she's in trouble, we might have to resort to extreme measures to find her. Before he could act, something unexpectedly bumped into his stomach. Startled, he looked down and saw Frieren, her small form barely noticeable unless he lowered his gaze, hunched over and clutching the hem of his clothes with trembling fingers. Oh, so you were here all along? He said, blinking in surprise. The wind's been so strong I thought it was just snow slapping against my coat. Quote. Frieren slowly raised her head, her expression frozen in a mix of anger and exhaustion. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, making her words almost incoherent. Why don't we just leave you behind? Ash interjected, grinning as if it was the most natural thing to say. Frieren froze, her eyes wide with confusion. She had only meant to ask why they'd forgotten about her, but Ash's bizarre response left her completely baffled. She blinked a few times, at a loss for words. Ash, fighting back a laugh, lightly tapped her on the head with mock seriousness. What are you talking about? How could we possibly leave you behind? No, no. All right, don't worry. We would never abandon you. There's no need to be afraid. No, that's not. Hey, quote. Before Frieren could finish her sentence, Ash suddenly hoisted her up, beaming with a cheerful grin. It's okay, let's get out of here together. Quote. The absurdity of the situation, paired with Ash's hearty smile, made Frieren want to be angry. Yet, instead, she took a deep breath, attempting to compose herself. Slowly, she said. What I'm trying to tell you is, there's a small cabin nearby. Could you please stop? Just stop, wandering around in circles? I'm not trying to go in circles. We're just lost. Quote. Lost or not, there's a cabin nearby. I know where it is, so please, stop circling. Quote. She had been trying to tell him this for ages, but Ash, walking ahead with Fern on his back and entirely engrossed in their own world, hadn't noticed her attempts to catch up. Her voice had been drowned out by the wind and snow, and her near-frozen limbs hadn't helped. To be honest, Frieren had been this close to resorting to offensive magic to stop them, avalanche risk or not. Ash raised an eyebrow. Wait, you knew there was a shelter nearby this whole time? Why didn't you say anything earlier? Do you think I didn't want to tell you? You were walking so fast I couldn't keep up. Frieren snapped, her frustration evident. And you completely forgot about me. You just left me behind. Quote. Frieren seemed particularly resentful toward Ash at the moment, barely holding back the urge to give him a scathing retort. Is it possible that this is tragedy, happened because you're too small and walk too slowly? Ash ventured. Is it possible? Frieren's voice dropped into a chilling tone, her glare sharp enough to cut through the snowstorm, that if you keep talking, I won't be able to stop myself from killing you? All right, sorry, don't get mad. Just calm down and tell me where to go. Quote. Though Ash still felt guilty for forgetting Frieren, he wisely decided to hold his tongue and followed the direction her trembling fingers pointed. Fern, on the other hand, had been silently consumed by guilt from the moment she realized they'd left Frieren behind. Still clinging to Ash's back, she buried her face against Ash's shoulder like a big, silent hot water bottle. Being carried in front of Ash, Frieren was finally starting to feel a little warmer. Even so, she curled up in his arms, her gaze heavy with indignation and confusion. What on earth were you and Fern talking about that made you completely forget about me? She asked with a hint of accusation. Thinking about some complicated things? Ash replied vaguely. So, what complicated things? If there's a chance, I'll have a proper talk with you. But honestly, I hope that chance never comes. When did you start saying such cryptic nonsense? Ash's response was as puzzling as it was unhelpful, leaving Frieren entirely confused. She couldn't resist the urge to grab her wand and whack him over the head. Seriously, she thought, it's bad enough that I almost froze to death. He won't even give me a proper explanation? But Ash's dilemma wasn't something he could easily discuss. Fern's recent growth had brought its own share of awkward complications, and Ash was terrified of being misunderstood as a pervert, especially since Fern spent so much time riding on his back. Despite being lost, Frieren's memory proved surprisingly sharp. Her directions, though delivered with lingering resentment, guided them back to the right path through the relentless wind and snow. With Ash's speed, it didn't take long for him to bring them down the mountain. Soon, an isolated cabin came into view. It looks like someone's already inside, Ash noted from a distance, detecting faint signs of movement. Fern, still clinging to his back, immediately blushed at the thought of being seen like this. Without a word, she quickly slid off and stood on her own 2 feet. Frieren, on the other hand, had recovered somewhat in Ash's arms during the trek. Yet, she had no intention of moving. The idea of leaving the relative warmth felt as unpleasant as being dragged out of bed on a freezing winter morning. She stubbornly stayed curled up, wishing she could just drift off to sleep. Ash, eager to get inside and warm up, walked to the cabin door and pushed it open without hesitation. Hum tilde, hum tilde, hum tilde, hum tilde. Good, very good. I'm warming up. Hum tilde, hum tilde, hum tilde. A middle-aged man stood in the center of the room, shirtless and doing squats while grunting with enthusiasm. It seemed he was exercising to keep warm, but If the indoor temperature is very low, Ash commented instinctively, doing shirtless squats could cause your body temperature to drop even faster. It's really only advisable when the room temperature is moderate or high. Are you trying to stay warm or freeze yourself? Quote. Ash's natural tone and casual analysis caught the man off guard, and he blinked at Ash in confusion. Chapter 99. 5. Growth. The elves, almost frozen to death. Frieren, still observing the room, sighed in exasperation and nudged him. Why are you overanalyzing? Just get inside already. Quote. Sorry, I forgot you were still cold. Ash apologized casually as he subconsciously stepped into the room. But before he could take another step, Fern grabbed him by the back of his collar and yanked him back outside. Closing the door firmly, Fern began lecturing him with an unexpectedly harsh tone. Master Ash. Master Frieren. Let's find another place. Why? Ash asked, puzzled. Because there's a pervert in there. You really have a knack for being harsh, even when it's not directed at me. Is this because of a lack of proper education? Quote. Ash lowered his head slightly, turning to Frieren in his arms as though seeking agreement. However, she returned his gaze with a sharp glare. Why are you looking at me? This is your problem, she shot back icily. Fine. Let's just... Ash began. But before he could finish, the door reopened. The shirtless man stepped out into the snowstorm, his gaze sweeping over the trio who hadn't yet moved on. I didn't expect to be called a pervert, he said indignantly before his attention turned to Frieren. Wait, are you an elf? Huh? It was only then that Frieren noticed the man's own pointed ears. Ash, intrigued, raised an eyebrow. I have to say, I'm surprised too. I didn't know there were uncles among elves. Quote. Because I've lived a long time, the elf man replied with a hint of pride. Speaking of humans and elves. He trailed off, his expression turning serious as his gaze shifted between Ash and Frieren. It's better if you two separate soon. No one will be happy if this continues. Separate? Ash blinked, looking slightly amused. You're unexpectedly old-fashioned. It's not about being old-fashioned. The elf man stepped forward, his tone grave. I've lived long enough to see my fellow tribesmen suffer through centuries of regret. I don't want the same for you. Quote. Well, isn't it a bit rude to say something like that so suddenly? Ash countered, his tone still casual. Because you're leaving, aren't you? The man replied bluntly. If I don't say it now, I won't get another chance. That may be true, but... What? The elf man interrupted. Do you still refuse to consider separating? Aren't you thinking about the future? No, what I want to say, Ash clarified, suppressing a chuckle, is that Frieren and I are not in that kind of relationship. Quote. Why didn't you say so earlier? The man froze for a moment, staring blankly before throwing his hands in the air in frustration. Shouldn't you have denied it from the start? Why argue with me so seriously about it? Because it seemed interesting, Ash replied with a smirk. Besides, I was just about to ask you. Aren't you cold, standing here bare-chested in the snow? Isn't your sweat freezing? Do I even need to answer that? Of course I'm freezing. Quote. The elf man shivered visibly as his indignation melted into sheer discomfort. His loud complaints echoed through the snowstorm. Frieren and Fern, having stayed silent throughout the bizarre exchange, exchanged a glance before closing their eyes with identical sighs of exasperation. Neither showed any intention of stepping into the argument. If possible, they both thought, it would be better not to associate with either of these fools, one who's earnestly advising on non-existent issues, and the other who's seriously debating over them. The cabin itself stood quietly in the woods, its origins unknown to any of them. Frieren squatted beside the roaring fireplace, her face glowing with satisfaction as the warmth chased away the lingering chill. The elf man, now clothed and visibly humbled, sat nearby, still shivering as he watched Fern pack their belongings. His voice trembled as he spoke. Little girl, thank you for lighting the fire. I lost mine while climbing the mountain. If I hadn't run into magicians like you, I don't know how much longer I would have had to keep exercising just to stay warm. I might have even frozen to death. You're welcome. Fern, who still harbored some reservations about the strange-sounding elf uncle, subtly shifted away, using Ash as a shield to avoid eye contact. Ash noticed and chuckled, patting Fern's shoulder. You look pretty strong. Why didn't you just rub 2 sticks together to make a fire? How did you end up in this mess? Quote. Rub 2 sticks together. Seriously, who do you think made me resort to such desperation? The elf uncle shot back, his expression a mix of frustration and exhaustion. Ash, however, merely glanced out at the heavy snowfall beyond the window, completely unfazed. Blame the weather. And maybe the fact that you were running around shirtless in a snowstorm. Quote, "There's another important point you're avoiding," the uncle muttered, his tone still tinged with irritation. "Why don't you just say it outright?" "Really? Oh, you mean how you started lecturing me without fully understanding the situation? Look, I admit I overreacted," the elf uncle grumbled. "But you could have clarified things from the beginning instead of dragging it out." "But you didn't ask in the beginning, did you?" Ash countered with a sly grin. "You just jumped straight to conclusions, lecturing me about how humans and elves don't work well together. I was only humoring you within the context you established. At no point did I say Frieren and I were a couple, did I?" "That's true." With no real counterargument, the elf uncle let out a defeated sigh and slumped his shoulders. The weight of his own misjudgment left him visibly deflated. By the fireplace, Frieren, now thoroughly warmed up, chuckled softly and shook her head. "Don't take what he says too seriously. He's just bored most of the time and loves messing with people. Honestly, this guy's just a little bad. That's all. Just a little bad?" The uncle looked at her with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Ash, crouching down near the fire, picked up 2 pieces of wood and a dagger. Ignoring the ongoing banter, he began shaving off wood chips and crafting a makeshift wooden awl under the curious gazes of the group. "All right," he said, smiling. "As an apology, let me teach you how to start a fire without magic. It's a handy trick if you ever lose your flame again. Start a fire. Just with wood." The elf uncle asked skeptically. "Of course. Watch closely." Ash pressed the wooden awl against the wood and began spinning it rapidly with his hands. The friction generated enough heat that white smoke began to rise, and soon the area turned charred. After blowing gently on the wood chips, they ignited into a small flame. Everyone watching stood frozen, wide-eyed in astonishment. How did you do that?" The elf uncle stammered. "You mean you can just spin it like that and blow on it to make fire?" Quote, "Friction increases the temperature at the contact point," Ash explained nonchalantly. "When it gets hot enough to reach the wood's ignition point, it'll catch fire. Usually, you'd need tools to do this. But it's not impossible by hand. Just takes practice." I don't fully understand," the elf uncle admitted, staring at Ash in awe. "But are you some kind of genius?" His previous frustration seemed to vanish entirely, replaced with admiration. Even Fern clapped enthusiastically from the side. "As expected of Master Ash. You always come up with the most brilliant ideas." "Indeed," Frieren added begrudgingly. "Even though he's so frivolous, he does have moments of surprising ingenuity. His inventions are always oddly practical." Quote, "Well, anyway," Ash interrupted with a grin, brushing off the compliments. He extended his hand toward the elf uncle. "Let's start over. I'm Ash. What's your name?" Quote, "Monk Craft. Meeting you at this moment must surely be the guidance of the goddess," Ash said with a faint smile. As he spoke, Craft instinctively reached for the pendant of the goddess hanging from his neck. Craft frowned slightly, his expression caught between skepticism and curiosity. "The goddess? Don't tell me you don't believe." "No, I do." "Really? You look at this pendant like it's scrap metal," Craft said, eyeing him critically. "You have no respect at all. Frankly, I've never met anyone with less faith than you." He touched the pendant again, his face a mixture of surprise and disbelief. Ash shrugged nonchalantly. "It's not just how it looks. To me, this thing really is no different from scrap metal." "Then why do you wear it?" "Because the goddess hates me." "How could that be?" "The goddess is gentle and kind." Quote, Ash chuckled dryly. "Gentle and kind, huh? Well, I can't use the holy book, and healing magic barely works on me half the time. In a way, that's almost impressive." Craft stared at him, baffled. After a moment of silence, he frowned. "Did you do something?" Ash smirked. "When I was a kid, I got drunk and threw up on the goddess's statue." Quote, "When you were a child?" Craft asked, his brow furrowing further. "If that's the case, surely the goddess would have forgiven you by now, right?" Ash waved his hand dismissively. "Let's not dwell on unhappy things. Speaking of which, aside from Frieren, I haven't seen another elf in a long time." Quote, Neither have I, Kraft admitted, sensing Ash's reluctance to continue the topic. Deciding not to press further, he nodded as the group began to exchange introductions. The night passed uneventfully after everyone had introduced themselves. However, since Kraft had lost his supplies, Ash lent him his own sheets. Frieren and Fern shared a bed, while Ash and Kraft each claimed a spot on the wooden floor near the fireplace. But late at night, Frieren, sleeping soundly, shifted in her sleep and inadvertently rolled to one side, leaving Fern exposed to the cold air. Fern curled up instinctively, shivering from the chill. Ash, who had been quietly practicing magic, noticed and rose without hesitation. He took the sheets that originally belonged to Fern and gently covered her with them. "You're still just a child," he murmured softly, a small smile tugging at his lips. He reached out and lightly stroked her long, purple hair before returning to his spot. He resumed his meditation, ensuring Fern had settled and stopped shaking before he fully focused on his practice again. As a demon, Ash's body rarely succumbed to fatigue. Ever since he had gained the ability to transform, maintaining his human form consumed minimal energy. Even without sleep for a week, he could remain as sharp as ever. To him, wasting time on rest was unnecessary unless absolutely needed. Unbeknownst to Ash, Fern had woken up the moment he covered her with the sheets. After all, there was a stranger in the room, and her instincts had kept her alert. But when she felt the familiar warmth of Ash's touch and the gentle motion as he stroked her hair, she chose to remain still, feigning sleep. The warmth in his palm, so comforting and familiar, made her yearn to stay like this a little longer. Without realizing it, she allowed herself to relax, sinking into the moment. When Ash finally moved away and sat cross-legged to resume his practice, Fern peeked at him from beneath the covers. Her gaze lingered on his figure, her expression tinged with complexity. She unconsciously clenched the warm sheets he had left behind, holding onto the lingering trace of his kindness. She couldn't understand. Ash was already so strong. Why did he push himself so relentlessly, practicing magic and martial arts with unwavering determination? What was he preparing to fight against? More than anything, she wondered if she could ever truly help him. The thought left her feeling small and uncertain. Still, as she watched him, her heart filled with a quiet wish. She hoped that one day, she could be of use to him. And if she could make an extra wish, it would be this, that they could remain like this, together, forever. Chapter 100, The Person Who Praises. Although Fern didn't look directly at Ash, her tenderness and anticipation were revealed through her subtle actions, grasping the sheets tightly and the emotion lingering in her eyes. Even with his eyes closed, Ash could sense something. Yet, unless Fern spoke up, he wouldn't understand why she kept glancing at him, her gaze carrying a quiet hope. "Do you want me to touch your head again? You really are such a child. I just did it, didn't I?" He smiled faintly at the thought and moved to sit beside her once more. Without hesitation, he gently stroked her soft, purple hair. Fern's unease melted away almost instantly. "As expected, Master Ash understands me. After this, he won't leave without saying anything again, right?" The warmth of his touch brought a sense of peace that made her lips curl into a small, contented smile. Quietly, she reached out and grasped the hem of his clothes, drifting into a deep, secure slumber. Ash waited until she was fully asleep before withdrawing his hand. Then, he resumed his uninterrupted practice under the dark, wintry night sky. The next morning, sunlight did not grace the room as expected. The sky remained gloomy, and the icy wind howled through the gaps in the doors and windows. Ash, who had stayed awake all night, opened the door to check outside. The world beyond was still blanketed in thick snow. The blizzard, far from subsiding, continued unabated. Snowflakes fell endlessly, like streams of white gauze cascading from the heavens. The landscape, mountains, trees, and everything within sight, was transformed into an immaculate, pure white canvas. The sight was so breathtaking that Ash couldn't help but admire it. "It's exactly as I imagined." Bang! Before he could finish his thought, a hand slammed the door shut behind him. Startled, Ash turned to see Frieren glaring up at him, her face flushed with irritation. "Don't stand there sighing over the view. You might not feel the cold, but we're freezing to death in here." "Ah, my apologies. Forget it. At least you admitted it." Frieren wanted to lecture him, but his rare, honest apology softened her frustration. With a huff, she returned to the fire. The group spent the morning gathered by the warmth of the flames, chatting idly. Later, they ventured outside together to retrieve Kraft's carriage, which had gotten stuck in the snow. The supplies they recovered were plentiful enough to sustain the four of them through the bitter cold. Despite their differences, especially when it came to faith and race, Frieren and Fern found it easy to converse with Kraft. As for Ash, his natural ease with conversation meant he could get along with anyone willing to talk, so there was no issue with communication. In the days that followed, time slipped by like a gentle stream. The cold wave from the north lingered, and the blizzard persisted intermittently, trapping the group in the cabin. For Ash, however, being stuck indoors wasn't an issue. As a magician and a warrior with the rare ability to fly, a feat human magicians could not easily replicate, he would occasionally take advantage of breaks in the weather to leave under the pretense of exploring the surroundings. In truth, he used these opportunities to travel to both the royal capital and the Demon King's castle, neither of which was far from their current location. Human flying magic, after all, was little more than a crude imitation of demonic techniques. It consumed an enormous amount of energy, lacked maneuverability, and was difficult to control. This was why, even though they were all magicians, none of the others attempted to use flying magic to avoid the blizzard or speed up their travel. It was also the reason Frieren, despite her considerable strength, never chose to fly, even when they had risked being left behind before. Ash could control his body to fly even in a blizzard, but Frieren and the others would be blown away by the fierce winds unless they used protective magic to shield themselves completely. However, enveloping their entire bodies in protective magic would consume an enormous amount of magical power. Under normal circumstances, even when under attack, magicians only deploy protection briefly and only on the area being targeted. Of course, while this protective magic consumes a significant amount of energy, its defensive capabilities are extraordinary. A single blast of ordinary attack magic, for instance, could pierce through 5 2-meter thick earthen walls, leaving a hole with a diameter of over 3 meters. In terms of destructive power, human attack magic, derived from the refinement of killing spells, far exceeds the strength of tank artillery. Its penetrative force is comparable to, or even greater than, the main guns of battleships during large-scale destruction. Due to the immense energy consumption required for such magic, full body protection while flying is impractical. Furthermore, short-term protection does not provide warmth, making it impossible to use this method to escape the cold. As the snowstorm began to subside, the group prepared to part ways, setting out once more. Speaking of which, Frieren, Kraft said, seated on a wooden stump at the edge of the forest as he carved a wooden pendant in the shape of the goddess. He glanced at her as she passed by. "You're different from Ash. You simply don't believe in the goddess, right? Though that guy is utterly despised by her, it does make me believe in the existence of goddesses a little more," she replied, her tone tinged with sarcasm. "Haha, Tilda, you'd make a good missionary," Kraft chuckled, his gaze shifting toward Ash, who was practicing martial arts by fending off monsters passing through the area. Ash, overhearing the comment, sighed in exasperation. "I'd rather not have that kind of bizarre function. But have you heard about me?" Kraft asked, smiling as he turned his attention back to Frieren. "No. Should I have? Are you some kind of celebrity? And what does this have to do with believing in goddesses?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Kraft's smile grew faint as he replied, "Not a celebrity, no. I just meant, as elves, no matter how great our deeds or how much justice we accomplish, time will eventually erase us. All who know of our deeds will disappear." Quote. A flicker of loneliness crossed Kraft's face as he spoke, his tone heavy with melancholy. This peculiar statement made Frieren pause. "Do you think the goddess will remember? Is that why you believe in her?" "Yes," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "I want to be praised by the goddess in heaven when I die. I want her to say, 'Well done, Kraft, you've lived a wonderful life.' That's my only wish, to have my faith in the goddess acknowledged." Quote. As he spoke, Kraft gently touched the goddess pendant hanging on his chest, his expression filled with quiet anticipation. His whispered hope lingered in the air before he turned to Frieren, his voice earnest. "It's unbearable to think that no one will remember the path I've walked in life. That's why I believe in the goddess. Without her, I'd feel completely lost." "Your faith is unexpectedly utilitarian," Ash interjected, unable to stay silent any longer. His tone carried a hint of disillusionment as he regarded Kraft, the monk whose apparent piety had, until now, seemed unshakable. As Ash grumbled about the exchange, a memory flickered in his mind. Now that I think about it, Heiter had similar ideas. Ah, true. Heiter once said he wanted to enjoy a life of luxury in heaven and be praised by the goddess, Frieren replied, recalling her old friend. Her mind wandered back to moments at the orphanage Heiter sponsored, and she couldn't help but laugh. That drunkard used to sit there, drinking, saying things like, "The goddess will definitely praise me for being honest and pure. And what's wrong with that? You don't think there's anything wrong?" Frieren stared at him, dumbfounded. You believers in the goddess are truly strange. We've all walked a long road to get here, Frieren, Kraft said seriously. Despite his deep faith in the goddess, he wasn't fanatical and maintained an open perspective on belief. If there were no goddess, I would be lost, and so would he. Facing the inevitable death awaiting us, what else is there to hold on to? Instead of worrying about what happens after death, why not figure out how to stay alive? Ash interjected, pinning a monster's hand to the ground before turning his head to them calmly. Relying on someone else. This is your choice as an elf. You're so young, Ash, Kraft replied with a soft chuckle. I used to be as fiery as you, but in the end, only the goddess will remember everything. I'm not interested in compliments. Ha, fair enough. But you're human, you don't have to worry about being forgotten, Kraft remarked before glancing at Frieren. His tone softened. You're different. Frieren, if you don't trust the goddess' words, then allow me to praise you on her behalf. I will remember your story. We do seem to have the same kind of faith, Frieren said, her thoughts drifting back to a similar conversation with Heiter at the orphanage. She remembered Heiter's words of praise for her efforts in hiding her magic, and she smiled helplessly, shaking her head. There's no need. I already have people who will praise me. Is that so? Although Ash may be a bit of a troublemaker, it seems you've got a good friend in him, Kraft said with a knowing smile. No, I wasn't talking about him, Frieren replied, glancing briefly at Ash before shaking her head with a light laugh. But I will admit, this guy praised my magic once a long time ago. And recently, when I wake up early, he's there praising me alongside Fern. I really have made some good friends. Kraft smiled, nodding in agreement. However, he held back other thoughts he wanted to voice. Even now, can they truly endure the challenges ahead? And when the time comes, will anyone still remember them? These lingering doubts tugged at Kraft, though he refrained from saying them aloud. The two elves continued discussing the goddess as they gradually made their way back to the small house nearby. Is it really meaningful to place all my hopes on someone I don't even know? Frieren mused aloud. Her expression shifted slightly, though she quickly dismissed her own thoughts. Well, even if I wanted to, it's impossible, and I don't need anyone's praise anyway. Ash, trailing behind them, muttered to himself, I don't see the point either. With a decisive motion, he kicked the skull of the monster beneath him, sending it rolling like a broken watermelon. Blood covered him as he watched the pair walking away. His gaze was sharp, yet calm. For him, the best way to ensure he wasn't forgotten was simple: keep those he cared about alive for as long as possible. But for humanity as it stood today, achieving immortality wasn't merely a matter of insufficient magical exploration. Although it was clear that his power wasn't enough, even if it were, it would be useless. Such matters were considered the privileges of the goddess. Just like holy magic, time magic, and all paths concerning life, these were monopolized by divine authority. According to the scriptures, if heaven truly existed, those souls belonged to the goddess. Wasn't preventing death an act that defied her will? Because of this, Ash had long resolved to gather the strength to confront the goddess. Using the system, he made wishes and transformed the souls harvested from the battlefield, channeling their essence to push the limits of his own body. After discussing the goddess with Frieren for a while, it was time for Kraft to part ways with the group. I don't think this is farewell forever. Let's meet again in a few hundred years, Kraft said with a calm smile. His gaze lingered on Frieren before he turned and walked away. Faced with her long-lost fellow elf, Frieren simply nodded, her demeanor exceptionally indifferent. This reaction made Fern, who had just received the pendant from Kraft and thanked him warmly, sigh in frustration. You rarely meet a fellow tribesman, Lady Frieren. Could you at least say a few words of farewell? Forget it, Fern, Ash interjected casually, placing his hand on Frieren's head out of habit. He ruffled her hair gently, explaining, for elves, parting like this is a common occurrence. Unless it involves someone truly important, it's hard for Frieren to feel too much about it. Quote, "Thank you for explaining, Ash," Frieren replied with a slightly annoyed glance. She slapped his hand away and began tidying her hair. "But I've told you countless times to stop touching my hair. Can you please be a little more respectful?" Quote, Fern, intrigued by Ash's explanation, asked curiously, "Is Lady Frieren so cold because she's lived for so long?" "That's not entirely true," Ash replied matter-of-factly. "There are elves with warm personalities, but it's clear she's one of the difficult ones." "Perhaps," Fern admitted. "But, Master Ash, it's because you treat Master Frieren so casually that you two have always been at odds, even after knowing each other for so many years." Quote, Ash had only been trying to help, but Fern's remark hit home, causing Frieren to beam with pride. She seemed eager to take the opportunity to mock Ash further. However, before she could say anything, Fern turned on her. "Of course, Lady Frieren, you're no better. You should work on your personality too." "Ah, yes." Quote, Frieren's smug expression immediately faded into embarrassment. It was precisely because both Ash and Frieren had difficult personalities that Fern often found herself caught in the middle, exasperated. As they traveled through the mountains, she took on the role of a stern caregiver, using moments when no one else was around to lecture the two. Ash and Frieren, well accustomed to such scoldings, walked silently with their heads down, allowing her reprimands to pass quickly. They refrained from arguing, not because they agreed entirely but because they knew Fern had a point. Ash, who hoped Fern would continue to grow into a responsible and kind person, saw no reason to debate. Meanwhile, Frieren had grown used to enduring such critiques and took them in stride. Chapter 105. Excessive Pampering. The Massacre in the Sword Village. As Ash, Fern, and Frieren traveled quickly through the harsh blizzard, Frieren gradually drifted into a comfortable sleep. Occasionally, she would open her sleepy eyes and mumble softly, guiding Ash with a lazy but trusting attitude through the storm. By late morning, a village hidden deep within the mountains slowly came into view. It was supposed to be just a simple village, yet this snow-covered settlement exhibited a scale and level of defense far beyond expectations. The village was encircled by a sturdy stone wall, not particularly tall but impressively solid, giving it the appearance of a miniature fortified city-state. Numerous stone watchtowers stood within the perimeter, evidence that the residents placed great importance on safety and had taken meticulous precautions. As the three approached the village, the howling wind and snow gradually subsided. To avoid drawing unnecessary attention or creating misunderstandings, Frieren and Fern tacitly dismounted from Ash's back. Crossing a small bridge, they passed through the city gate guarded by several hunters clad in sturdy, weathered clothing. A little girl with pink hair soon appeared before them, her clear eyes sparkling with curiosity and innocence, brimming with interest in these three strangers. "You've finally arrived, Lady Frieren." The little girl stood on tiptoe, as if trying to make herself appear taller. Spotting Ash, her expression turned to one of surprise. "And, Master Ash, you're still alive after all? Welcome back to Sword Village." "What? You know me?" Ash asked, scrutinizing her familiar-looking attire. "Wait, are you the current village chief?" "Yes, I am the 49th generation village chief." "It's hereditary," she said proudly. "And your magical image is hereditary too. It's always displayed in the village hall." After bowing respectfully, she turned to Frieren with a faint pout. "Lady Frieren, you're so excessive. You said you'd return in 50 years, but you never showed up. Master Ash, on the other hand, came by 20 years ago and helped us so much." "Thank you, I was just passing through." "Don't mention it," Ash replied nonchalantly. "Even so, you were amazing." The young chief's admiration was genuine. "You were much more reliable than Lady Frieren. If you weren't older and already had a husband, I'd want to marry you." "Really, Lady Frieren is just too much." Quote, her sudden, odd remark left Fern dumbfounded until she added with a playful smile, "Those were the last words of the previous village chief, my grandmother." Quote, "Oh, I see." Fern sighed in relief, patting her chest. Frieren, who had been subtly criticized by the previous chief's words, looked entirely unbothered. "Well, I did say I might come back 80 years later. That's still within reason. But an agreement is an agreement. The young chief puffed her cheeks in frustration before pointing at Ash. Master Ash came without any appointment. Why couldn't you do the same? Quote, as a village tasked with guarding the hero's sword for generations, you should be more than capable of protecting yourselves, no? Frieren replied coolly. Even so, a promise is a promise. The young chief exclaimed, clearly exasperated. She turned to Ash with pleading eyes. Master Ash, can you please do something about her? It's pointless, Ash replied with a wry smile. If her laziness could be fixed, it wouldn't have lasted this long. He crouched down to gently pat the head of the young chief, offering a kind but resigned expression. You should give up on chasing something so futile. Quote, it was difficult for Ash to explain why he had come to the village before, especially since his true intention had been to test the holy domain barrier that protected the holy sword. Fern, who had been quietly observing, couldn't hold back her curiosity. Master Ash, what agreement are you talking about? What exactly is this village? Oh, you don't know? Ash replied casually. As Frieren mentioned earlier, this is the village that guards the sword of the hero. In the sanctuary, well, actually a nearby cave, there lies the sword of the hero, said to have been bestowed by the goddess. That sword attracts monsters, who fear it and seek to destroy it. Frieren had promised to return here half a century later to check on things, but the last person to come was you, Master Ash. As expected of you, so kind and dependable. Fern beamed with pride, as if Ash's actions were a reflection of her own good judgment. However, after a moment of reflection, her expression shifted to confusion. Wait a second. Master Ash, I remember something different. Quote, from the past to the present, countless heroes have tried to draw the sword of the hero, but none have succeeded, Ash explained, his tone matter of fact. No. In the stories I've heard, wasn't it the brave Himmel who wielded the sword of the hero? That's just a fabrication, he replied bluntly. What? Quote, people in power like creating legends, so they invented a perfect version of Himmel. It's that simple. Quote, the stark contrast between the story and the truth left Fern momentarily speechless, unsure of the purpose behind such fabrication. Frieren, meanwhile, glanced at Ash with an amused smirk. I have to admit, it's surprising you came here specifically to protect this village. Could it be that you've taken a liking to the village chief? Quote, when I arrived, the village chief already had one foot in the grave, Ash replied dryly. But wasn't I rather attractive in my younger years? Came a playful voice from the young village chief, watching the exchange with interest. Indeed, Ash admitted without hesitation. The moment he said it, Fern, who had just been praising him, turned to glare. Master Ash, I was joking, don't look so terrifying. Ash sighed helplessly, then turned his attention back to the pink-haired village chief. Anyway, there have probably been more monsters around here lately. Since I'm already here, I'll help clear them out. Thank you, Master Ash. Just as my grandmother always said, you're so kind and gentle. The young chief's face lit up with joy as she rushed forward to hug him. Ash returned the gesture, patting the girl's head affectionately. Good, Tilda. The scene might have seemed heartwarming, but Fern, standing nearby, broke the mood with a cold remark. Master Ash, while I don't think it's likely, I need to confirm something, huh? Ash raised an eyebrow, his posture becoming defensive as he positioned himself slightly in front of the young chief. What's with that scary look? Quote, you're not interested in children, are you? What? Ash froze, his expression turning incredulous. You think I'd do something weird just because I was being a little friendly? Have I ever given you a reason to suspect me before? Well, Fern hesitated, recalling their shared past. You were cold to me when we were younger, but you were always gentle when it mattered. Don't twist things out of context, Ash shot back. Even now, I haven't exactly been cold to you, have I? The peculiar argument between Ash and Fern seemed to amuse Frieren and the young village chief. They observed with great interest, as if it was some kind of entertainment. However, their light-hearted exchange was soon interrupted as they arrived at the cave known as the Sanctuary for the Sword of the Hero. A large number of wolf-like monsters had gathered near the cave. The moment they noticed the group of outsiders, the monsters immediately began to encircle them. Since Lord Ash likes the village chief so much, you can handle everything here by yourself, Fern said, her tone sharp as she pushed him forward, clearly still upset. Kids these days, honestly. Ah, well. Ash sighed in resignation, but as soon as the wolves charged, he dashed forward without hesitation. Fern, despite her outward nonchalance, couldn't help but prepare her wand in case she needed to intervene. However, before she could lower it to cast a spell, the scene unfolding before her left her utterly speechless. Ash didn't even bother to draw his sword. Like a cannonball, he launched himself at the wolves, relying solely on his fists and feet. It was as if the monsters were no more than shadows to him. The wolf-like monsters, known for their coordination and ability to terrify even seasoned adventurers, were reduced to fragile paper dolls. With every swing of his fists, skulls shattered, limbs snapped, and bodies crumpled as though made of glass. The disparity in power was staggering. What should have been a vicious battle looked more like a casual game played by an unchallenged giant. The overwhelming force quickly crushed the morale of the demon wolves. Any resistance they tried to muster was futile, and even their attempts to howl in defiance were silenced instantly. Those fortunate enough to escape Ash's immediate blows abandoned the fight altogether, scattering into the wilderness with terrified whimpers. It was the first time Fern had ever seen monsters flee so desperately. Perhaps this was the most striking difference between a magician and a warrior. Magicians, while capable of devastating large-scale attacks, were inherently fragile, with their bodies as delicate as porcelain. A single misstep or well-timed strike could expose their vulnerability. But top-tier warriors like Ash, with magic coursing through their bodies, they became living fortresses, impervious to blades, spears, or even the crushing jaws of dragons. For monsters, there was no opportunity to exploit, no weakness to exploit, just the certainty of destruction. To Fern, there was only one word to describe the scene before her: massacre. As demon-like creatures, the wolves left no corpses behind when they perished. Only the traces of the battle remained. The disrupted snow and torn earth bore witness to what had occurred. The pristine white snowfield had become a chaotic mess of scattered debris, though even the blood that splattered from Ash's blows faded into nothingness along with the wolves themselves. It was as though none of it had ever happened. All that remained was a peaceful yet disordered snowfield. "Oh, that was amazing. Really amazing." Quote. The young village chief clapped her hands enthusiastically, her pink hair bouncing with excitement. Her innocent admiration contrasted sharply with the gruesome battle she had just witnessed. As expected of Master Ash. "It was incredible. Even better than the legends," she said with an admiring smile, her voice filled with childish awe. "The differences between worlds are staggering." Quote. Ash's gaze lingered briefly on her beaming face, a ripple of thought stirring in his heart. If children in the 21st century witnessed such carnage, they would likely be horrified, breaking down in tears. Yet here, in this harsh world, it had become a feat of heroism, worthy of celebration in a child's eyes. Perhaps it was the constant danger in their environment that shaped their admiration for power. Here, strength wasn't just respected. It was a necessity for survival, even for children. Before Ash could dwell further on the thought, the ground beneath his feet suddenly darkened. Fern's voice rang out, sharp and urgent. "Above. Watch out." Quote. But before she could finish her warning, Ash was already moving. He turned sharply, his body twisting mid-step, and in a flash, his blade was unsheathed. The moment Ash drew his sword and the moment he sheathed it was so swift that neither Fern nor Fern could follow the movements. All they could perceive was a translucent slash erupting from the blade, instantly cleaving a towering, wolf-like beast, over 10 stories tall, cleanly in two. The massive creature didn't even have time to emit a dying howl. Its enormous body, severed in half, crashed to the ground on either side of Ash, propelled by the sheer force of his strike. Boom! The two halves of the beast smashed into the earth with a deafening rumble, sending a cascade of snow and debris into the air. The impact was so powerful that Fern lost her balance and fell to the ground. In the center of this awe-inspiring scene, with snowflakes swirling through the air and blood raining down on either side, Ash turned calmly and walked back toward the group as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. His composed expression made the overwhelming feat appear almost mundane. The speed of his attack had been extraordinary, far outpacing even the fastest spellcasting. From start to finish, it had taken less than a second. The swiftness of the event left Fern stunned, unable to catch her breath, let alone fully process what had just unfolded. Is this Lord Ash's true strength? Fern murmured, her voice filled with awe. For a moment, she simply stared blankly at the familiar figure walking away, her heart overwhelmed by a mixture of disbelief and reverence. The shock she felt was beyond words, and it took her a long time to regain her composure. Chapter 101. The lying little girl. The priest in the swamp, the enormous beast that had leaped from the rift near the cave, was slain with a single blow. The sheer decisiveness of the act left Fern in stunned silence. The young village chief, who had fallen to the ground during the commotion, quickly got up and, with eyes sparkling with admiration, ran toward Ash. Without hesitation, she flung herself into his arms. Master Ash killed the Mountain Master with just one strike. You should marry me, Tilda. And then stay here forever. Okay, Tilda? Quote. What are you talking about? The strange and abrupt proposal left Ash bewildered. The young chief, however, responded earnestly. You don't understand. Our village has a tradition. Whoever kills the Mountain Master must marry the village chief, Tilda. Killing the Mountain Master means marrying the village chief. Are children these days capable of spouting such nonsense with a straight face? Quote. Despite his victory, Ash found himself unexpectedly cornered by the overly enthusiastic young chief, who shamelessly took advantage of her youth. The girl, who had lost her mother at a young age and inherited the role of village chief early, now only wanted to keep this powerful man in the village for protection. Clinging to him like a spoiled child, she pleaded persistently. I'm serious, and children don't lie. Believe me, Master Ash. Quote. I don't mean to criticize, but what exactly are you talking about? When I met your grandmother, your mother hadn't even been born yet. Quote. You're not the type to care about things like age, right? Love is what matters. As long as we have that, it's fine, Tilda. Quote. Shouldn't that kind of reasoning come from the older person in this situation? Quote. In this world, precociousness was common, especially for a girl like her, who had faced hardships from a young age and shouldered the weight of leadership early. She seemed to understand the importance of strength better than most. While Ash could understand her reasons for valuing him so highly and tolerated her clinging to him, he couldn't help but glance at Fern for help. His pleading look was enough to snap Fern out of her shock. Stop pestering Master Ash. It's not ladylike to act like this, she chided, stepping forward. Grabbing the back of the young chief's collar, Fern firmly pulled her away despite the girl's protests, flailing arms, and kicking feet. Once the girl was restrained, Fern turned to Ash with curiosity. The holy sword here hasn't been pulled out yet, she remarked. Could it be that even someone as strong as you can't pull it out, Master Ash? No, he just didn't bother trying, Frieren interjected lazily. He assumed the goddess wouldn't favor him, so he never even stepped inside. Is that so? Maybe the goddess just wants to test you. Come on, give it a try, Fern urged, her face lighting up with hope. I doubt it, Ash replied. The remaining demon wolves no longer pose a threat, and everything has been resolved. Let's head back. Quote. Fern's hopeful expression faltered as Ash patted her head gently, chuckled, and walked past her without a hint of hesitation. His disinterest in the holy sword was evident. Its allure seemed non-existent to him. Disappointment shadowed Fern's face, but Frieren quickly followed after Ash. She wasn't particularly concerned about the sword. She simply wanted to find a warm place as soon as possible. After aiding the Sword Village, Ash and his companions were warmly welcomed by its grateful residents. They were even invited to stay at the home of the young village chief. That evening, a grand feast was held in their honor, organized by the villagers. Throughout the festivities, the young chief refused to abandon her dream of marrying Ash. She remained by his side, acting coquettish and endearing. Unfortunately, Aunt Yaksu was a serious person and would never entertain the proposal of a young girl. She simply dismissed all the village chief's antics as childish pranks and rejected them repeatedly. But that night, despite his casual refusals during the day, Ash quietly made his way to the holy cave under the cover of darkness. Inside the cave, a seemingly simple, broad-bladed sword was embedded in a protruding rock. Its surface bore some rust, a testament to its age. Considering it had likely been stuck there for thousands of years, its condition wasn't surprising. What was remarkable, however, was how an ordinary rock could keep heroes from pulling the sword free for so long. Ash reached out tentatively, but a translucent barrier abruptly appeared at the entrance of the cave, ruthlessly blocking his advance. As expected, even after all these years, the barrier still won't let me in, he murmured, stepping back silently. At that moment, faint purple lightning flickered across his body. The smaller, more controlled gravitational lightning caused the surrounding space to warp and distort subtly. Ash raised an additional barrier of his own before releasing the gathered energy in a concentrated burst. Boom! The ground beneath him collapsed under the immense pressure. The goddess's invisible barrier recoiled inward, rippling violently as if it might finally shatter. However, no matter how relentlessly the thunder hammered against it, the translucent barrier remained intact, unyielding against the onslaught. Even after 20 years, it still looks like it's about to break, Ash mused. But in truth, there's no sign of it giving way. Truly worthy of being a sanctuary barrier bestowed by the goddess. Like those stone tablets, it's a miracle rarely seen in this world. Quote. He stepped closer, and the oppressive force of his gravity magic pushed the barrier even further back. Eventually, though, his efforts fell short. Reluctantly, he took a few steps back and left the sanctuary. Before departing, Ash used magic to tidy up the area, erasing any evidence of his midnight attempt. The next morning, the village noticed nothing out of the ordinary and cheerfully gathered to see them off. But even at the last moment, the young female village chief clung to Ash, desperately trying to convince him to stay and help protect the holy sword with the villagers. This time, Fern couldn't hold back. Even though the other party was just a child, she stepped in, forcibly separating the girl from Ash and dragging him away. The young girl wilted like an eggplant struck by frost. With encouragement from the village elders, she reluctantly gave up her attempts, for now. As they departed, she called out one final promise, Master Ash, don't forget this. I'll be waiting for your return. Especially 10 years from now. By then, I'll definitely be a beautiful young lady, and I'll greet you in the most dazzling way. Quote. Her clear, cheerful voice rang out as she waved her little hands energetically, hopping in place with excitement. Sure. If I remember, I'll reply, Ash said, turning back briefly. Why are you looking at me like that? He caught the subtle glances exchanged by the women walking beside him and quickly coughed, trying to dispel the awkwardness. I was just joking with the kids. Quickening his pace, Ash avoided any further misunderstandings, leaving the two girls to follow. Fern allowed a faint, barely perceptible smile to curve her lips as she muttered something under her breath, a quiet comment only she could hear. For now, she decided to hold off on lecturing him and hurried to catch up. After leaving Sword Village, the group continued their journey north, crossing the majestic mountains on their way to the Magic City. As the seasons shifted, the harsh chill of winter gradually gave way to the warmth of spring. Forests along the journey donned their vibrant green attire, lush and teeming with renewed life. During this time, however, Frieren had yet to return from her herb-picking ventures. Concerned, Ash was urged by Fern to go find her. He hadn't ventured far when he came across Frieren sitting at the edge of a small swamp. She hugged her knees, staring blankly ahead, while not far from her, an old man was recounting a story. I once had a good friend who loved adventures, the man began, his brown hair tied back in a ponytail, a beard framing his face, and clad in simple monk's robes. He looked wistfully toward the sky as he continued. He was strong and quick-witted, though his limbs were like those of an orangutan. A good orangutan, though, one who cared deeply for his friends. The monk's expression turned somber as he spoke. But as I grew older, and my childhood dreams faded, that guy suddenly showed up. He asked me if I wanted to go adventuring together. If only I'd taken his hand back then. Things might have turned out differently. But, his voice trailed off as he lowered his head, sighing deeply. That was 10 years ago. Even now, I can't help but regret it. Frieren, still seated with her knees hugged tightly, didn't even glance at him. Her expression blank, she replied. Why are you telling me this? Quote. Because. The monk gestured at his surroundings. The village where I live is hosting a harvest festival, and my elder brother sent me to gather wild vegetables in the forest. But as you can see, he pointed to the swamp, his body slowly sinking into the mire. I'm stuck in this bottomless swamp, and there's no hope left for me. Quote. The monk stretched out a mud-caked hand toward Frieren, a faint smile on his face as though seeking salvation. But if you take my hand now, maybe things can change. Just like they might have changed if I'd taken my friend's hand all those years ago. Wait, Frieren said, tilting her head slightly. I'm a little confused. Quote, at this point, is there anything left to worry about? He asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Your hands are dirty. Her answer was immediate, matter-of-fact, and utterly dismissive. The monk's smile froze. This really isn't the time to care about cleanliness, is it? Besides, young lady, all adults are dirty in one way or another. But this is the first time I've encountered something so dirty in a physical sense, Frieren replied bluntly, her calm tone unwavering. She shifted her gaze back to the monk, whose mud-covered hands trembled slightly. Unmoved, she turned her focus elsewhere. Wait here, she added. I'll think of a spell to pull you out of the swamp. Really? Then, please hurry. You must hurry. I'll do my best. Quote, as the monk despaired quietly, his eyes caught Ash sitting beside Frieren, watching the exchange with mild amusement. The monk's expression darkened. And you, handsome young man, why are you just sitting there? Watching. Because it's pretty entertaining, Ash replied, his tone casual. Ah, really? That's great. The monk muttered sarcastically, on the verge of tears. But don't you think now's the time to stop watching and help? Ash suddenly stood up, feigning realization. You're right. I just remembered. Fern asked me to do something. If I take too long, she'll scold me. The monk's face twisted in disbelief as Ash prepared to leave. The monk, visibly agitated, slapped the surface of the swamp in front of him, sending mud flying in all directions. His voice was filled with frustration as he exclaimed, compared to the life right in front of you, you're prioritizing trivial little things? It's bad enough that the elf is indifferent, but you've just been standing there, watching for entertainment. Is this really okay? Quote, Ash responded calmly, arms crossed, many lives are lost every second in this world. If you care so much about every death, you'll wear yourself out, don't you think? Yes, that's true. The monk shot back, his tone rising. But I'm right here. You can save me with just a simple gesture. The reason the world feels so cold is because there are too many people like you. Quote, after venting his frustration, the monk took a deep breath, forcing a strained smile as he extended his mud-covered hand again. Don't you want to make the world a better place? You can start by holding my hand. One small choice can make a difference. It can make the world a little warmer, at least for me. I'll feel that precious warmth. Quote, Ash looked at the outstretched hand with mild disgust. Your hands are filthy. I'd really rather not wash them. I'll wash them for you. The monk shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. I'll make sure there's not a single speck of mud left. So please, hurry up. Ash frowned, his expression troubled. Quote, But the image you're describing is just gross. Honestly, I don't want an old man holding my hand so carefully. Couldn't it at least be a pretty older sister? Quote, at this, Frieren, who had remained motionless and expressionless the entire time, turned her head slightly and said without hesitation. I'm not helping you wash them, just so you know. Ash shot her a withering look. Don't be so full of yourself. Take a good look at yourself before calling yourself a big sister. His tone dripped with disdain, as though he was long accustomed to her boasts. The monk, however, seemed personally offended. He pointed at Frieren with a mix of disbelief and outrage. That can be called a big sister? Don't insult the word, big sister. Frieren raised an eyebrow, unperturbed. Forget about Ash being rude. Are you even aware of your situation? Do you still want to be rescued? If you ask me which is more important, life or faith, the monk began dramatically. Life. Frieren interrupted, unimpressed. No. Before answering that, let me remind you of the demon. Call. Help, help. The monk's words were cut off as he sank deeper into the swamp, his mouth submerging. He sputtered and released a trail of bubbles. Master Ash, what are you, huh? Fern's voice rang out as she arrived at the scene, trailing off in confusion. She had been searching for the source of the cries for help, only to stumble upon an utterly bizarre sight. Frieren sat near the swamp, hugging her knees, her face devoid of emotion. Beside her, Ash was seated cross-legged, watching the scene unfold with mild curiosity. The monk, now nearly swallowed by the swamp, was flailing in desperation. Yet neither Frieren nor Ash seemed remotely inclined to intervene. The scene was so surreal that Fern doubted her own eyes. For a moment, she stood frozen, trying to process it. Were they seriously just watching the man drown without offering any help? Or were they simply waiting to see how long it would take for him to disappear completely? Ah, I remember now, Frieren suddenly said, breaking the silence. Without waiting for Fern to ask any questions, she reached for the wand beside her, finally recalling the magic she had forgotten. Chapter 101. 5. Fern's kindness is a miracle. The priest, still stuck in the swamp and struggling for his life, was suddenly yanked out of the mud like an uprooted lotus root, only to be unceremoniously tossed to the side. 10 minutes later, the priest, who had spent a long time retching and catching his breath, finally managed to recover some composure. I'm so sorry, Master Frieren and Master Ash. I've caused you a lot of trouble. Fern apologized weakly. Fern, glaring helplessly at the two culprits, who were deliberately avoiding her gaze and pretending to be busy, sighed and turned back to the monk, who had introduced himself as Sign. She bowed her head slightly. I'll reprimand them later. My deepest apologies for their behavior. Frieren's expression twisted into something unreadable, while Ash stared intently at the village in the distance, seemingly lost in thought. Sign offered a wry smile and shook his head. It's fine. After all, you still saved me. He gestured toward the village not far away. By the way, are you sure you don't want to visit our village? We're preparing for the Harvest Festival, but we'd be happy to host you. No, we need to head to the nearby town. Wait, what are you doing? Frieren started to decline on Fern's behalf, but Ash interrupted by placing a firm hand on her head, forcing her to bow slightly. Hey, she snapped, glaring at him in annoyance. Ash ignored her irritation and turned to Fern with a grin. The Harvest Festival sounds like fun. Fern, let's stop by the village and enjoy ourselves for a bit. Fern's frown deepened. What are you talking about all of a sudden? Don't we still need to get supplies from the town? She narrowed her eyes, suspicious. You're not thinking of slacking off, are you? I won't go easy on you, even in a crowded place, Master Ash. Of course not. I just want to experience the local culture, Ash replied innocently. Besides, we're not in a rush, so why not take our time? Yes, Fern. I want to see it too. Frieren quickly chimed in, putting on her best expression of excitement as if trying to support Ash's case. Fern stared at the two of them, at a loss for words. After a long pause, she sighed in resignation. Fine, if you insist, but don't think this means I'll let you off the hook. Once we're back and no one else is around, expect to be properly scolded in the room. Ash nodded eagerly, his grin unrelenting. Of course, we understand. We'll reflect on our actions thoroughly. But for now, let's enjoy the Harvest Festival. Frieren, for her part, raised her hands defensively. We know we were wrong, Fern, but the festival, it's important. She waved her hands animatedly as if to emphasize her sincerity. When Fern turned away to focus on the path ahead, Frieren leaned toward Ash and jabbed him in the side with her elbow. Without looking at him, she muttered under her breath, Ash, your plan isn't working. I might have miscalculated a bit, he replied, his voice equally quiet. Think of another way. Quote, please, let's not force it. An angry Fern is hard to pacify. Quote, trailing behind Fern, the two whispered in hushed tones, strategizing on how to avoid the scolding they were sure awaited them. Fern, walking ahead, caught snippets of their hushed conversation, but chose to let it slide for now. With outsiders present, she decided it wasn't the time to address their antics. Instead, she sighed quietly and continued onward. Meanwhile, Sign, who had been listening to the odd exchange, couldn't contain his curiosity. What is your relationship? Exactly. It doesn't seem as simple as just teammates. Fern turned back slightly, her expression calm. Lady Frieren and Master Ash raised me, she began but stopped mid-sentence. She turned sharply toward them, her tone firm. Lord Sign just warned us that there are many dangerous and venomous creatures in this area. Both of you, stay alert and avoid getting bitten. Sign hesitated, glancing between Fern's serious demeanor and the antics of Ash and Frieren. Are you sure you didn't raise them? And? His doubtful gaze lingered on the group, clearly unconvinced of their supposed dynamic. No, I didn't lie. And they just act foolishly occasionally, but they are actually very reliable people. Is that so? Sign's expression turned doubtful. Considering the earlier behavior of the two, it was hard for him to reconcile Fern's claims about their occasional foolishness and their supposed reliability during critical moments. He couldn't help but shoot the two figures behind Fern a sympathetic look. How good must this child's nature be, to still turn out so upright despite having to deal with these two. Sign thought as his eyes flicked between Fern and the troublemakers in question. Meanwhile, Ash and Frieren, oblivious to Sign's thoughts, were walking behind Fern, earnestly discussing ways to avoid the scolding they were certain was coming their way. Ash, showing no regard for Sign's earlier warnings, reached up to pluck a small cherry-like fruit from a bush beside the road. No sooner had he picked it than a green poisonous snake suddenly slithered out from the underbrush, its body coiled and its fangs bared as it lunged to bite him. But Ash's reflexes were far sharper than the snake's. Before the venomous creature could strike, Ash casually flicked his fingers with a snap. The snake was knocked unconscious and hung limply, still twitching. Ash grabbed it by the head and turned to Frieren, his expression dead serious. "Do you think this thing would taste good?" Frieren recoiled, stepping back immediately. "What the hell are you doing? Why are you asking me? I don't know how to handle snakes." She gave him a pointed look before muttering in annoyance. "Just throw it away before you get us in more trouble." "But it's the Harvest Festival, right? Why not contribute something unique? This snake looks like it could make a decent dish." Frieren's lips curled in disdain. "And what if someone eats it and dies because you didn't prepare it properly?" Ash waved her concern off. "It's fine. Even if it bites me, we have Priest here, don't we? They'll handle it." Unperturbed, Ash walked ahead with the limp snake in hand. Once in front of Sign, he held it up, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Hey, Sign, look at this. Does this kind of snake taste any good?" "What? Sign, startled by the green snake dangling far too close for comfort, jumped back reflexively. His face twisted in panic as he waved his arms to keep Ash at bay. "What are you doing? Take that thing away. Don't you understand how venomous it is?" Quote. Ash tilted his head, looking at Sign quizzically. "But I caught it safely. And aren't you a priest? Why are you so afraid of poison?" Quote. "Just because I can detoxify doesn't mean I'm not afraid of pain. Besides, when I warned you to avoid dangerous, poisonous creatures, I didn't mean for you to catch them." Quote. Ash shrugged, unbothered. "Relax. I wasn't going to bite it raw. I'd cook it first. That's only natural. What part of this is natural?" Sign yelled, darting away from the snake as Ash stepped closer. Fern, who had been quietly observing until now, sighed deeply and stepped in. Pressing down firmly on Ash's arm to lower the snake, she fixed him with a stern glare. "I'm begging you, just throw it away." Ash hesitated, glancing at the snake wistfully. "But it's such a waste. Throw it away," Fern repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. All right. Ash sighed, reluctantly flinging the unconscious snake back into the forest. But before Fern could continue her reprimand, a scream echoed from the direction of the trees. "Ah!" Quote. The voice, unmistakably Sign's, made everyone freeze for a moment before rushing toward the sound. They parted the bushes to find Sign standing frozen on the winding path ahead. At his feet was the now awake and very much enraged green snake, coiled and hissing. The venomous snake, now thoroughly enraged, sank its fangs into Sign's calf, as if blaming him for all its misfortune. "Did you do this on purpose? What kind of grudge do we have?" Sign bellowed, his gaze shifting to the scar on the snake's head, left by Ash's earlier flick. Realizing the culprit, he stared at Ash with a mixture of grief and anger. "It was just an unfortunate accident," Ash replied with a shrug, completely unrepentant. "How was I supposed to know you'd step on it? You were just unlucky, Lord Ash." Quote. All right, Ash sighed, finally turning to Fern, who was glaring daggers at him. His tone softened as he added, "I'm really sorry about that. Truly." Quote. However, his apology lacked the sincerity it desperately needed. He spoke as if trying to convince himself rather than the others, his gaze wandering far into the distance. Unsurprisingly, Sign wasn't convinced. Looking at Fern, then back at Ash, Sign muttered, "This child turned out to be so upright. It has to be a miracle from the goddess, right?" Quote. While casting holy magic to detoxify himself, Sign couldn't help but feel a newfound sense of faith. It was the first time he so firmly believed in the goddess's existence. After all, how else could he explain how someone raised by the likes of Ash hadn't turned out to be a complete villain? At the foot of the mountain road lay a humble village, its unassuming church nestled among the buildings. Despite being bitten by the venomous snake, Sign insisted on treating his saviors to a meal at the church to express his gratitude. Ash and Frieren, eager to avoid another lecture, immediately agreed to the offer. Sign, however, had initially hesitated to include Ash, given how close he had come to nearly killing him again. But as Ash stepped into the church, something unexpected happened. A faint ripple flickered through the air as the goddess's protective blessing, an inherent part of the church, shattered like a soap bubble. To most people, this event went unnoticed. Even the priests within the church remained oblivious, as the blessing had always been faint. Yet Sign, uniquely favored by the goddess, felt the change acutely. The sudden absence of the goddess's protection unsettled him. Glancing around, he tried to pinpoint the cause, only to find his gaze drawn to Ash. For the first time, Ash felt strangely out of place in the sacred space. The sensation was subtle, so faint that it could easily go unnoticed unless one paid close attention, but to Sign, it was undeniable. Meanwhile, the person in question appeared blissfully unaware. Completely at ease, Ash strolled toward the altar and casually sat beside it, exuding a demeanor as if he had returned to his own home. Sign couldn't suppress his exasperation. No matter how you look at it, you're being way too casual. Just watching you sit there makes me feel like I've accidentally walked into your house. Why overthink it? Sit wherever you like, Ash replied nonchalantly, patting the spot beside him as if encouraging Sign to join him. Sign's patience finally snapped. "This is my house," he shouted. Fern immediately intervened, pulling Ash away by the arm. Bowing apologetically to Sign, she sighed. "I'm sorry. Master Ash is always like this. Too casual for his own good. That's probably why the goddess hates you," she muttered under her breath, casting Ash a disapproving look. No, I doubt that's the case," Sign interjected with a shake of his head. "Although I'd love to chastise him, I don't think the goddess minds his behavior. After all." Sign paused, his gaze softening as he added, "I've sat here many times before, huh?" Quote. Both Frieren and Fern froze, their confusion palpable. Another priest, dressed in formal robes and glasses, adjusted them with a resigned sigh. "Sign. At least show some faith in front of others. And as for you, Master Ash, you truly live up to your unrestrained reputation. You know me?" Ash asked, raising an eyebrow. "I've heard of you and Lady Frieren from Lord Hyter," the priest replied, his hand gently brushing the goddess pendant on his chest. The pendant was unlike the standard ones and bore a distinct, sacred design. "This holy seal was also bestowed upon me by Lord Hyter." Tilda, I remember that seal. "Isn't it only awarded to the most exceptional local clergy?" Quote. "Yes, it's the only thing I can truly take pride in," the priest admitted, a faint note of regret in his voice as his fingers lingered on the holy seal. "Sign's talent, however, far surpasses mine." "Hey Tilda, is that so?" Ash turned his attention to Sign with curiosity. However, Sign, visibly uninterested in the conversation, scratched his head and abruptly walked toward the back of the church. "I'm going to prepare dinner. What do you want to eat?" Quote. "I want meat," Ash replied without hesitation. "What are you saying to a priest? And don't even think about it. Frieren saved my life, while you almost ended it. You're not getting any meat. Isn't that a bit petty? You're a priest, shouldn't you be more forgiving? It's about principle." Sign shot back, his irritation evident. Without waiting for further discussion, Sign ignored Frieren and Fern's input entirely, heading to the back of the church and closing the door firmly behind him. With Sign gone, the church settled into an unusual stillness. The priest's previously neutral expression grew heavier. He glanced at the remaining three, then lowered his head as if deliberating before speaking. "Forgive me if this seems sudden, but may I trouble you to hear my story?" Quote. "Of course," Ash responded casually, leaning back slightly. "But seriously, you two really are brothers. How is it that both of you love storytelling so much?" Quote. Frieren, unable to resist, quipped in agreement, "He's right. You're quite the storyteller." Quote. Her words were met with a sharp, disapproving look from Fern, forcing her to stop mid-sentence and retreat into silence. Fern, ever formal and polite, bowed slightly toward the priest. "Please, Father, go ahead." "Thank you," the priest said softly, his voice tinged with sorrow. His hand gripped the holy seal tightly as he continued. "Our parents passed away early, and as the elder brother, it fell to me to raise Sign, who is much younger than me." Quote. A pained expression crossed his face as he spoke. When he was a child, he always dreamed of becoming an adventurer. The light in his eyes back then, it told me he didn't want to live an ordinary life like mine. He didn't want to spend his days as a simple priest, repeating the same routine. But now he's become exactly like me when I was young, a boring old man. That's what growing up does to people, Ash said with a knowing nod. As you grow older, you lose your dreams and hopes. But that's just how life is. Frieren glanced up in surprise, her gaze fixed on Ash. What? You still had dreams? I didn't notice when we were fighting the Demon King together. The two seemed poised to launch into yet another banter-filled exchange when Fern, visibly exasperated, interjected sternly. Lady Frieren, Master Ash, I understand that you two have a good rapport, but could you please refrain from casual conversations while someone else is speaking? Quote. Ash offered an awkward but polite smile, scratching the back of his neck. My apologies, Father. Please, continue. Quote. Chapter 102. I will wait for the day when you confess to me. Although Ash and Frieren had started chatting without noticing, the priest didn't appear angry. Instead, he sighed softly and spoke with a faint trace of melancholy. I understand that when you grow up, you lose your dreams. But I believe he's extremely bored with his life now. So, I hope that, at least in the end, he can pursue what he once dreamed of. Is that so? Ash looked puzzled, unsure why the priest was telling him this. Can you please take him out of this village? You don't have any priest in your group, so I'm sure having one would be beneficial, even if it causes some trouble at first. Quote. The priest glanced at the three adventurers, his gaze lingering before he bowed his head respectfully, making his earnest request. Ash, however, could only feel a headache coming on. From Sign's reaction earlier, it seems like you've asked this of other adventurers before, but he's never left. Am I wrong? Quote. Indeed. The priest admitted with a wry smile, but I believe he's waiting for someone who can give him the push he needs. Even his friends couldn't get him to leave 10 years ago. Quote. That. The priest's words faltered, and his expression turned bitter as he lowered his head once again, unable to offer a response. Later, they had a simple vegetarian meal at the church. Being a holy place, it was no surprise they couldn't ask for much more. People like Heiter, who indulged in drinking and eating meat, were exceptions, and that was why he was often called a wine and meat priest. At least, that was what Ash had assumed. That evening, after temporarily settling into the village's only inn, Ash and Frieren found themselves reading books by the bed, immersed in a shared silence. Meanwhile, Fern stood nearby, her hands on her hips, glaring at them with evident displeasure. Lady Frieren, Lord Ash, do you have any excuse for ignoring someone in need? Quote. I couldn't help it. His hands were filthy at the time. Frieren turned her face away, embarrassed. Ash, on the other hand, replied with complete confidence. I just wanted to see if he had anything more to say. Besides, saving people isn't my responsibility. It's Frieren's job, isn't it? You're terrible. Both of you are absolutely terrible. Quote. Neither of them made any effort to hide their thoughts, which only made Fern angrier. Her cheeks puffed up as she pointed at them, scolding them incessantly. After what felt like an eternity of reprimands, Fern finally got them to lower their heads in mild shame. Once she was satisfied with their apparent repentance, she sat down beside Ash. Looking up at him, her tone became more serious. If Lord Sign joins our party, it might not be such a bad idea. After all, what the priest said is true. It's always safer to have a priest in your group. And having someone who believes in the goddess as a companion might have a good influence on you. Quote. But I don't think Frieren, Ash, can be saved. Ash and Frieren objected in unison, their words overlapping perfectly. The way they gave up on each other so readily made Fern narrow her eyes and cast a cold glare at them. Suppressing her growing irritation, she spoke in a low voice. Why are the two of you so in sync only when it comes to things like this? It's not about being in sync, Ash retorted. He glanced at Frieren before continuing. Frieren, what do you think about adding a priest to the group? Me? Frieren hesitated, folding her legs beneath her on the bed. She fiddled with her ponytail, her expression disgruntled. Honestly, you're hated even by your own kind, aren't you? Frieren, what are you talking about? He's human. Quote. Lady Frieren does tend to say strange things sometimes, Fern interjected, sighing helplessly as she looked at Ash. Regardless, Master Ash, please try your best to persuade Lord Sign. Quote, me? Well, since you put it that way, I guess I'll try a little harder. Ash felt a bit troubled by the sudden predicament thrust upon him. However, upon giving it some thought, he realized that having a priest in their group could indeed be convenient. Finding no reason to refuse, he decided to take action and headed out. As for where Sign might be, he barely needed to search. The moment he came downstairs, he spotted him almost immediately. After all, there was a tavern situated right beneath the hotel. The smoky atmosphere of the tavern was far from holy, and Sign, who initially gave off a somewhat serious impression, now seemed anything but. He sat there in his priest robes, a cigarette dangling from his lips, a glass of wine in hand, and a deck of cards spread out in front of him. At the same table, 3 others sat with him, each with copper coins stacked in front of them. No matter how one looked at it, the scene screamed of gambling. The sight reminded Ash of their earlier interaction. Sign had lectured him about asking for meat in the presence of a priest. Watching the current scene unfold, Ash couldn't resist making a snide remark as he stepped into the room. Among the priests I've met, you're definitely the one who enjoys wine and meat the most. This is called fostering camaraderie. Care to join us? Sign replied, utterly unashamed, flashing an open grin. I heard from my brother that he wants me to join your group. What's your opinion? Quote, it'd definitely be more convenient to have a priest around. Forget it, I'm the village priest. If I leave? Sign trailed off, only to pause mid-sentence as an idea seemed to strike him. Wait a second. Playing cards with just the 3 of us isn't much fun. Why don't you join in? I'll tell you what. If you win, I'll join your team. That's surprisingly straightforward. Quote, is it? But if you lose, don't blame us for leaving you stripped down to your underwear. Fair enough. Teach me the rules first. Quote, Ash didn't expect the condition to be so simple, so he casually pulled up a chair at the table. Ordering a drink from the waiter, he smiled at Sign and the other players, a pitying smile, as if he were looking at doomed men. He saw no reason why he'd lose. Luck might not be his strong suit, but in terms of hand speed, no one here could match him. Ash blended into the game effortlessly. After 3 rounds of drinks and 3 tables of cards, the results were undeniable. The copper coins on Ash's side of the table had piled up like a mountain, leaving Sign staring at the sight in disbelief. How? 10 consecutive wins. Are you sure this is your first time playing cards? It's just a little beginner's luck, Ash replied calmly, though his smirk said otherwise. Now that I've won, will you admit defeat? Quote, no. I was only joking. Do you really think? Really? I think you meant it. Ash interrupted, his grin unfazed. He then turned his attention to the frustrated village chief, who was banging his head against the table. Village chief, Klaus, I'll return all the coins I won today. But in exchange, how about you strip him down to his underwear and toss him out? Of course, no problem. Wait. No, hold on. At least spare the inner. Quote, Sign's protests were cut short as the 2 men, now fully energized, pounced on him without hesitation. Despite his frantic pleas, they pressed him to the ground and proceeded to strip him of his clothes. His shrill howls of protest echoed throughout the tavern. Ash, mindful of the situation's impact, ultimately asked the 2 men to leave Sign in his shorts, sparing him from being entirely inappropriate for children. Once the adjustments were made, they unceremoniously tossed Sign out of the tavern. Pocketing Sign's money, Ash emerged feeling refreshed. He looked down at the man sprawled awkwardly on the ground, his rear in the air, and remarked leisurely, this is what happens when you cheat. Don't think I'll give in so easily. I'm a dirty adult. What kind of adult would I be if I gave up after something like this? I don't mind. It's just an attempt anyway. If this doesn't work, Frieren and the others will try persuading you instead. I'll just sit back and watch the show. You. What do you think adventure is? Why are you always just watching a show? Sign snapped, turning his head to glare at Ash with the disappointment of a man wronged. He scolded him with the fervor of a passionate protagonist. To be honest, I don't see any passion in you. And passion? Adventure? No. I'm just taking a casual walk outside. Why should I get so worked up about it? A casual walk. Sign was stunned by the unexpected answer. But aren't you heading all the way north? Quote, "Rather than talking nonsense, don't you think you should adjust your attitude? If you keep talking to me while sticking your butt in the air, I might want to kick it." Quote, "Oh, young man, you don't understand. In fact, this position is good for clearing the mind. Ow." Quote, Sign, lying prone with his rear in the air, had just lit a cigarette when he felt a sudden, sharp pain. Covering his backside, he curled up on the ground, glaring at Ash with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You actually kicked me? Didn't I say I was going to kick you?" Quote, "But who actually does that?" "I think I'm pretty normal," Ash replied indifferently. Squatting beside the uncle who was now cradling his rear and tearing up, Ash asked, "So, don't you want to reconsider joining us?" Quote, "Do you think a normal person would agree to the request of someone who stripped him down to his underwear? I made sure they left you your shorts, and what difference does that make?" "You even kicked me," Sign grumbled, touching his behind with a wounded expression. His tone was full of grief as he began worrying about whether it was swelling. "Well, you stuck your butt out right in front of me. Can't you at least apologize at a time like this? You broke the deal first. Can we just pretend this never happened?" Quote, Faced with Ash's mix of casualness and unpredictability, Sign, having been thoroughly defeated both at cards and by force, found himself with no choice but to suppress his complaints. Even though he had no intention of taking any risks with Ash's group, circumstances left him no room to resist. Curling up on the ground, Sign stared up at the bright night sky, lighting another cigarette in solemn resignation as if holding a funeral for his pride. Since the tavern was directly beneath their lodgings, Frieren and Fern naturally heard the commotion. Curiosity got the better of them, and they quickly rushed downstairs to investigate. What they saw left them speechless. Ash was crouched peacefully on the ground, while Sign lay curled up as though he'd been on the receiving end of some particularly unreasonable treatment. Stripped of his clothes save for his shorts, he shivered in the cold spring night. Before they could question the situation, they saw Ash poking Sign's arm with a branch he had picked up from the ground. Turning his back to them, Ash issued an ultimatum in a tone that seemed almost playful. "If you agree to fulfill your promise now, I'll return your clothes to you. Or, are you planning to head back to the church dressed like this?" Quote, "Normally, at this point, shouldn't you at least return my money?" Sign grumbled. "No, that's out of the question," Ash replied flatly, his reasoning sounding absurdly logical. "That's money I earned with my own skills. Why should I give it back to you?" Quote, Hearing this, Fern, still perplexed by the scene before him, had a sinking feeling. He stepped forward with a dark smile, leaning in to whisper in Ash's ear, "Master Ash. What exactly are you doing?" "Ah, this is too much," Frieren chimed in as she crouched beside them, adding fuel to the fire. "I asked you to recruit teammates who could pull their weight, and instead, you strip them naked? No matter how you look at it, this is a bit excessive." Quote, Ash, unbothered, reached out and smacked Frieren lightly on the head. "This is the fate of a reckless and weak loser who digs his own grave," he said sternly. "What loser?" Fern asked, confused, as she grabbed Ash by the collar and pulled him upright. "Did you use force?" "Force? Of course not," Ash replied coolly. "We were just having fun playing cards, but he lost miserably. That's all. Damn it. The village chief is as strong as an ox, but this guy, he's worse, stronger than a demon. I couldn't win a single game. I don't think I'll ever have the courage to sit at a poker table again." Quote, Sign muttered angrily as he curled up on the ground again, looking like a child sulking after being unfairly punished. "Wait, this was gambling?" Frieren, finally piecing it together, shook her head in disbelief. "None of you priests take anything seriously," she sighed before continuing, "but fine, Sign. Didn't you say earlier that you were full of regret? Don't you want to come with us? Head north." Quote, "I said that a long time ago," Sign muttered dejectedly. "That was before. I should have caught up back then. Now, I'm just a poor old man, left with only underwear and shorts." Frieren closed her eyes and paused, seemingly weighing her words carefully. Then, she spoke with deliberate seriousness. "I'm talking about now, not the past. Now. Now I'm your companion, right? You're the ones who let the village chief leave me like this." Sign snapped. Yeah, I guess." Frieren's serious expression faltered, her voice trailing off as she glanced uncertainly at Ash. Ash, however, casually avoided her gaze, tilting his head skyward. A faint smile played on his lips as he murmured in an exaggerated, poetic tone, "The moon looks so big tonight." "What is this? What kind of vulgar and ridiculous nonsense are you spouting?" Frieren groaned, rolling her eyes. Fern, less amused, crossed her arms and scolded sharply, "Hurry up and return the clothes. And the money too? Why should I? I earned it fair and square." Ash began, only to be cut off. "Gamblers are the worst. I hate it when Lord Ash gambles." Fern's cheeks puffed in indignation as she glared at Ash, hands on her hips. "And bullying is wrong. Isn't that what you taught me before?" Quote. Chapter 102. 5. Seduction technique. Although Fern looked angry, the purple-haired girl resembled a puffed-up pufferfish, which was unexpectedly adorable. This sight made Ash sigh in resignation. With a casual gesture, he took out Sign's purse and tossed it next to the man still sprawled on the ground. "I've been talking for so long, and it's been useless, but this kid gets mad and suddenly he listens." Sign stared at the purse in disbelief, doubting his own eyes. "Because Ash has always doted on Fern Tilda," Frieren said with a chuckle, shaking her head. However, when she turned to Sign, her expression shifted into something far more serious. Saying, quote, "What? Quote, I really hate you, so I've decided I'm going to get you to join us, even if I have to force you." "What? Why? That's too weird, isn't it? And what's going on with your team?" Sign, alarmed by Frieren's sudden declaration, looked at Ash and Fern for confirmation. But all he saw was Ash patting Fern on the head. Fern, who had initially looked awkward, now wore a sweet, innocent smile. The atmosphere between the two was oddly harmonious. For a moment, Sign was thoroughly confused. What was the deal with Fern, who was supposed to be taking care of these two? And what kind of strange dynamic existed between them? Still, after they left, Sign quietly returned to the tavern. Bitter tears of defeat stung his eyes as he begrudgingly put on the clothes that the village chief had stripped from him. Alone in the cold night, he looked up at the vast sky, exhaled a puff of smoke, and eventually made his way back to the church, his head full of unanswered questions. Sign could never have anticipated it, nor could he comprehend how Ash was so proficient at cards, especially for his first time playing. But Fern and Frieren had their suspicions. Based on their knowledge of Ash, it was easy to guess he had most likely cheated. Under normal circumstances, Ash probably would have lost early on. But failure? That wasn't in his nature. Given the absurd speed Ash had demonstrated when taking down the Mountain Master, it wouldn't be surprising if he had used that same speed while playing cards with the villagers. Openly cheating would have been child's play for him. If anything, it would have been strange if he hadn't crushed everyone. Even a seasoned gambling king wouldn't stand a chance against that kind of hand speed. As a warrior standing at the pinnacle of humanity, Ash's participation in a simple card game with villagers could only result in one outcome: bullying, as Fern had pointed out. Normally, no one would think to gamble against such a formidable figure, but, "Master Ash, honestly, what am I supposed to say to you?" Fern muttered, her initial anger fading as Ash affectionately patted her head. Yet she couldn't help but feel conflicted, watching Ash so calmly admit to using his speed to cheat. Ash, who should have been an extraordinary figure, had not only stooped to playing cards with villagers but had also openly cheated. And now? He lay quietly on his bed, pulling the quilt over himself and pretending to sleep. Even as Fern tried to scold him, Ash remained unbothered, offering no response. In the end, Fern could only sigh, remind him to brush his teeth before bed, and return to her own room to pack her luggage. Frieren, however, stayed behind. She was still sitting in the chair by Ash's bed, swinging her legs idly. After a long pause, she looked at him and then, without warning, raised her legs and slid her cold feet under his quilt. She pressed them directly onto his stomach. "Wake up. Fern's gone, and I have something to tell you," she said casually. "Are you even polite?" Ash grumbled, pulling the quilt tighter around himself. "If you have something to say, just say it. Who shoves their feet into someone else's bed? And, I took off my shoes, and I washed them before bed," Frieren interrupted, completely unbothered. As soon as Ash opened his eyes, he began to complain, but before he could finish, Frieren, expressionless, shot back with a single retort. Her words silenced him for a moment. Then, with a deep sigh, he shifted to lie on his side, staring at her with a serious expression. Although I want to commend you for taking off your shoes, I must say that your lack of common sense remains incredibly rude. Really? But didn't you once say that friends shouldn't fuss over trivial matters? We've known each other for thousands of years, haven't we? After all, when you first woke me up, you just... Very good. Let's set that topic aside for now. You win. Ash sat up abruptly, cutting her off. He seemed desperate to change the subject, his voice tinged with exasperation. Let's discuss whatever it is you wanted to talk about. What? Feeling guilty all of a sudden? Frieren, though unusually slow-witted, could roughly understand his thoughts after all their time together. But now wasn't the time for teasing. She left her feet tucked in his bed for warmth, her gaze locking onto his. Speaking slowly, she said, "That guy Sign, let's not debate whether he can be a partner, but I think he should become an adventurer. Because you see your past self in him, don't you?" Ash, still lying on his side, opened the quilt and cast another glance at her small feet clad in black tights. He decided not to comment further and instead sighed, resting his chin on one hand. His tone turned casual. "It's precisely because you see your past self in him that you don't like him. That's why you had that inexplicable, same-race hatred, isn't it?" "Huh? How do you know that? How many years do you think we've known each other?" He smiled faintly, yawned, and lay back down, closing his eyes as if to avoid looking at her, someone far too familiar to him. "Maybe I know you better than you know yourself." "Really? Well, that's a possibility. Though I'm a little annoyed you figured me out," Frieren muttered, her tone dripping with feigned disdain. Yet beneath her words, a soft smile played on her lips. Her voice shifted, turning playfully provocative, yet inexplicably gentle. "Don't underestimate me. I might not be as slow as you think." "How do you know?" Quote, "You're hiding something from me. Something very important." "You think so?" "I do, but I won't press you. I'll wait. Because you're my most important friend." Frieren gazed at him, her faint smile meeting his eyes as they opened again. "That's a little surprising," Ash admitted. "Take it as a pleasant surprise. And, until the day your life comes to an end, I'll wait for you to tell me everything." Quote, on what seemed like an ordinary night, Ash and Frieren shared a rare moment of honesty, though it was only the tip of the iceberg. The next morning, however, Frieren appeared as though nothing had happened. Perhaps feeling embarrassed by her candid words the night before, she acted as if the profound conversation had been nothing more than a fleeting dream. With her usual energy, she pulled both Fern and Ash into the festivities of the Harvest Festival, all while lobbying Sign with unrelenting enthusiasm. Despite being a priest who indulged in drinking, eating meat, smoking, and gambling, Sign turned out to be surprisingly diligent in the village. He helped prepare decorations, assisted farmers in picking vegetables, and took on various other odd tasks without complaint. The drunken priest, Sign, was busily preparing for the Harvest Festival, and he asked Ash and Fern to join him in the work. However, before they could settle into their tasks, Frieren dragged them away, recruiting them for her own efforts while constantly trying to persuade Sign to join her cause. Despite Sign's attempts to dissuade them, it was futile. He couldn't ignore the dreams and hopes shining brightly in their eyes, dreams he himself had once harbored. Those looks, full of unwavering belief in a brighter future, stood in stark contrast to his current self. Their youthful enthusiasm was like that of old friends who had never been worn down by the hardships of life. It was so dazzling, he found it hard to face. Yet, among the three of them, Ash was different. Ash didn't possess the same shining dreams or lofty hopes as Frieren and Fern. Even as they worked together, Sign couldn't help but recall the strange feeling of dissonance he'd sensed when Ash first left the church. It had been fleeting, almost illusory, but it left him wondering why Ash felt so out of place there. Ash stood apart in more ways than one. Unlike Frieren and Fern, whose eyes sparkled with adventure and ambition, Ash didn't embody the carefree spirit of an adventurer. Though he acted with a free-spirited demeanor, there was an underlying tension in him, as if he were always braced for battle. His self-discipline was unmatched, he practiced tirelessly every day. This stark contrast to Sign's own lifestyle left the priest feeling a tinge of shame. Being around the three of them gave Sign an odd sense of displacement. They felt like completely different kinds of people, each with their own unique energy and atmosphere. And yet, Frieren and Fern seemed to trust Ash more than anyone else. This inexplicable trust sparked Sign's curiosity about their pasts, but no matter how much time passed, he never got any answers. Similarly, Sign's steadfast refusal to join Frieren left her with no clear solution. After much deliberation, one evening, Sign found himself watching Ash practice magic by the river near the church. Frieren, sitting nearby, suddenly nudged him. "You and Sign seem to get along surprisingly well. You should have some idea of how to convince him to join us, right?" Ash glanced at her briefly before replying, "He likes big sisters." Quote, "I already knew that," Frieren said, crossing her arms. "But he's just like you. He refuses to acknowledge me as the older sister. I'm obviously older than all of you. It's weird." Quote, she tilted her head in confusion, clearly unable to grasp their perspective. "What's so hard to understand?" Ash thought, sneaking a glance at her petite figure and flat chest. He couldn't help but sigh internally, but before he could voice his thoughts, Fern, who noticed his reaction, had to suppress a laugh. Oblivious to their thoughts, Frieren simply shrugged off her confusion. She stood abruptly, her expression suddenly resolute, as if she had reached a conclusion. "There's no other way. Even though I don't really want to do this, it's the only choice I have left." Quote. "Judging by how you phrase that, I can already tell it's not a good idea," Ash muttered. "Trust me. I'll show you my charm as a big sister, Tilda," Frieren declared with a confident smile. Ash, however, was unimpressed. He covered his face with his hand, shaking his head with a sigh. "I can already imagine you losing all your dignity in the years to come." "What are you talking about, Master Ash?" Fern asked. "You'll understand soon enough," Ash replied, his tone laced with resignation. HMPH. Frieren puffed out her cheeks in mock annoyance, but she didn't let it bother her. Instead, she led the group toward the river near the church, her determination unwavering. After waiting by the river for a short while, Frieren finally spotted her target. Frieren quickly emerged from the bushes, calling out to the priest who was heading into the church. "Sane, huh?" Sign turned around warily, assuming she was up to some new trick. What he didn't expect was what happened next. Frieren brought her right hand to her lips, pursed them, and blew a kiss in his direction, finishing with an exaggerated, chew tilde, sound. For a moment, the air seemed to freeze. It took Sign a few seconds to process what just happened. He turned to Ash with a blank expression and asked, confused, "What is this person doing?" Quote. Ash, visibly embarrassed, rubbed his forehead, trying to shield his face from the awkwardness. "As you can see, it's supposed to be a flying kiss." Quote. Meanwhile, Frieren stood proudly with her hands on her hips, wearing a smug expression that betrayed no self-awareness. "Hey he tilde," Sign grimaced as if he had just swallowed a fly. "I see. But why on earth would you suddenly blow me a kiss?" Quote. To put it simply, Ash replied, his voice flat with resignation, "She's trying to show off her charm and convince you to join us on your own accord." Quote. The sheer absurdity of the situation made Ash want to dig a hole in the ground and disappear. Sign's face twisted further in discomfort, and he waved his hand dismissively. "I'm begging you, take this child away." Quickly, Ash sighed deeply, sharing the sentiment. "I already planned to." He grabbed Frieren by the back of her collar and turned to leave, trying to salvage what little dignity was left. However, just as they began to walk away, Ash noticed Fern standing nearby, her face flushed red and her mouth covered. Her reaction caught Ash off guard. "What's wrong with you?" Quote. Fern stammered, her voice filled with admiration. Frieren Samer. "So mature, so sexy tilde. Her?" Ash froze, momentarily dumbfounded. The child I raised turned out like this. Should he call Fern innocent or something else entirely? Ash couldn't decide. Instead, he felt an impending headache creep in. Am I the only normal person here? Ash couldn't help but question his reality. Meanwhile, Frieren, being dragged backward, stroked her chin thoughtfully. "That's strange. It worked so well before. Himmel even fainted when I did it, but Heiter, Eisen, and Ash didn't react at all." Ash let out a long sigh and muttered, "Have you ever considered that you might have been deceived?" Quote. But Frieren shook her head confidently. "Master said those who are too young are useless, which means, I'm not young, after all." Ash cut her off, exasperated. "You look like a little girl, so you've got no right to call others young." Honestly, it's weird anyone would fall for your trick in the first place. Wait a minute. Frieren exclaimed. She used her agility to break free from Ash's grip. With renewed determination, she puckered her lips again, kissed her left hand, and blew him a kiss, this time from an uncomfortably close distance. Once again, she added an over-the-top, chew tilde, for good measure. Ash froze, utterly unresponsive. Aha! So it was a matter of distance. This unprecedented closeness even left Ash speechless. Frieren beamed triumphantly. But her smugness didn't last long. Less than 3 seconds later, Ash broke free from his daze, raised a fist, and landed a light punch on her head. Ow! What was that for? Frieren crouched down, clutching her head in pain. I'm sorry, Ash replied flatly, his expression deadpan. I felt insulted and acted on impulse. You don't even sound like you're apologizing. That's because I'm not sincere. Honestly, I feel better after hitting you. You bastard. Quote. Frieren fumed, ready to retaliate, but Ash shook his head in exasperation. Without waiting for her to react, he walked away, heading towards Sign, who was still standing nearby, rubbing his temples as though contemplating how to escape this group of misfits. Chapter 103, The Journey. Even though Ash had hit her on the head, Frieren's perception of his actions gave her high hopes for him. After all, she had been the only one working hard during this time. And though she didn't want to admit it, she knew deep down that Ash was at least a little more emotionally intelligent than she was. While Frieren brimmed with optimism, Sign's mood was quite the opposite. The flying kisses, which seemed more like a joke than anything else, only strengthened his belief that this group was simply playing games with him. When Ash walked toward him for the first time on his own initiative, Sign let out a long sigh of relief. Taking a deep drag from his cigarette, he smiled wryly and said, "Finally tired of playing house. Are you here to give up on their behalf?" That's not it, Ash replied evenly. Sign raised an eyebrow. Oh, so you're not giving up yet? From the way you act, it seems like you couldn't care less whether I join or not. Are you just playing along with them for fun? Ash shrugged. It doesn't matter to me personally, but Frieren can't stand people like you. People who remind her too much of herself, holding back for some reason. The least I can do is help a little. Quote. Sign chuckled bitterly. What? Still doting on her even though you two are always at each other's throats? Well, we've known each other for a long time. A little bickering is normal, isn't it? Ash replied with a helpless gesture. But let's skip the small talk. We're both men, so I'll get straight to the point. What do you want to say? Stop beating around the bush and just tell me the real reason why you refuse to leave town. And no, saying, it's too late, won't cut it. That's not the truth, at least not right now. Quote. Sign sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. You really are more persistent than Frieren. Faced with Ash's unyielding gaze, Sign reluctantly scratched his head and gave in. To put an end to their pestering, he decided to tell the truth. The reason Sign refused to leave wasn't overly complicated, but the origins of it traced far back into his past. When Sign was a child, a man named Heiter came to the village and invited his elder brother to join the holy city. For priests from the rural northern countries, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The position came with a significant increase in salary, better living conditions, and an elevated social status. The offer even included permission for Sign to live in the holy city with his brother. It was the kind of opportunity that no rational person would refuse. But Sign's brother declined. I happened to overhear their conversation from behind the door, Sign began, his voice tinged with melancholy. My brother chose to stay here, serving as a country priest for the rest of his life, also I wouldn't lose my parents and the home I grew up in. Quote. He exhaled a puff of smoke, watching it drift upward, and his expression grew bitter. So how can I, of all people, abandon my brother, leave this village, and pursue some dream? It's just not something I can do. Ash was silent for a moment, then nodded. I see. I understand. If you understand, then leave. I can't possibly. I said I understand, Ash interrupted, but your brother wouldn't agree with your reasoning. You might wonder how an outsider like me could come to that conclusion, but think about it. Didn't he actively encourage you to join us? Ash interrupted Sign with a calm yet firm tone. As Sign stood there, stunned, Ash locked eyes with him and, in a low, reproachful voice, said, Your brother cares deeply for you, yet you've misunderstood his intentions. To some extent, you're arbitrarily and unilaterally saying, I'm doing this for your own good, aren't you? Quote, why have you never asked what kind of person he actually wants you to be? Does he really want to see you burdened by regret like this? Quote, Sign's expression turned blank as Ash's words sank in. The cigarette he was holding slipped from his fingers, falling to the ground. As his lips moved slightly, as though he wanted to respond, the priest, his elder brother, suddenly appeared beside him. Striding up with a furious expression, he raised his hand and slapped Sign across the face. Saying, so this is what you've been agonizing over? Don't compare me to you. I have never once regretted my decision back then. And you, how long are you going to wallow in regret, brother? Covering his face in shock, Sign stared at his elder brother, his eyes wide with disbelief and astonishment. Ash, meanwhile, quietly turned and walked away, leaving the two brothers to their conversation. He returned to where Frieren and Fern were waiting, giving them space to reconcile. Ash couldn't help but feel proud of himself for resolving the situation so smoothly. Surely Frieren and Fern would be impressed by his efforts. Or so he thought. Quote, You can't accuse others of acting unilaterally, saying, I'm doing this for your own good, when you've done the same thing yourself. Frieren gave him a pointed look. You used to think it'd be better to have Fern adopted by someone else, didn't you? Fern pursed her lips, clearly upset. Master Ash, please reflect on your actions. Quote, Why do you still remember what happened when you were little? Ash felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. How had he managed to hurt himself while lecturing someone else? Wasn't this the moment to bask in his own wisdom? How did it turn into this? Covering his mouth, he lowered his head in frustration, so disheartened that he nearly squatted down to escape this harsh reality. At sunset, by the river near the church, Ash lay on the grass, staring at the fiery horizon and reflecting on his life. The faint sound of footsteps approached, accompanied by the acrid smell of cigarette smoke. Sign's voice broke the silence, tinged with melancholy. You were right. I apologized to my brother. Yeah? But don't misunderstand, he's always been a gentle brother. He's never hit me once, not even when we were kids, Sign admitted with a sigh of guilt. And yet, I let such a gentle brother strike me today. What a peaceful family. Ash couldn't help but compare Sign's family to his own past with aura. He sighed inwardly, pondering the vast difference between humans and demons. Though Sign's family seemed filled with warmth, Ash couldn't shake the bitterness of his own experiences. As someone who had tried to do good, why had he been treated so differently? Why had his kindness gone unrecognized compared to priests who indulged in vices like drinking and feasting? Sign, sitting beside him and watching the sunset, tilted his head curiously at Ash's musings. Come to think of it, you seem to have a younger sister. How do you get along with her? Quote, Of course, I'm a gentle brother too. Back when we were younger, we depended on each other. She'd always rush to take on all the work, so responsible that it broke my heart. I couldn't even stop her. What a wonderful sister. Quote, Yes, that's what I'd expect my sister to be like. Expected? It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Is that so? Sign seemed troubled by something but, after hesitating for a moment, he decided to drop it. Forget it. Anyway, I've decided to become an adventurer. I'm going to chase after that guy. Quote, Yeah? Ash responded nonchalantly. My travel goal is to find him, to fulfill that boring childhood dream we shared. Until then, I'll stick with you guys, yeah? Quote, Shouldn't this be the time to get emotional? Ash, why are you still so cold and indifferent? Can't you show at least a little bit of necessary emotion? Sign protested indignantly. Because whether I care or not depends on the moment. If I say I have no interest, then I have no interest. If I say I do, then maybe I do a little, Ash replied with an air of nonchalance. Honestly, I'm just passing the time with my kids after practice. Sign was momentarily thrown off by Ash's bluntness. Seriously, why are you even traveling? Quote, I told you, it's just a walk. Then what about the things you said about me earlier? Were you saying bad things about me? Quote, I couldn't help it. I wanted to impress the kids, but it seems to have had the opposite effect. Ash sighed dejectedly. When Fern sat down beside him, Ash fell silent, unwilling to continue the conversation. Sign, quiet for a moment, suddenly remembered something and asked, "Speaking of which, what is your purpose?" Quote, "To visit the two largest capitals of the nearby countries," Frieren replied absent-mindedly, flipping through a book as she sat above Ash on the lawn. "If possible, I also plan to visit the heaven." "The heaven? Do we really need to go there? Won't we end up there after we die? Can Lord Sign go too?" Fern asked pointedly without looking up, as she gently adjusted Ash's rumpled clothes. The question made Sign cautious. He turned to Ash with some unease. Does this kid hate me?" Quote, "Isn't that normal? Children wouldn't like an uncle like you. You should learn from me." No. You're just being taken care of by this kid right now, aren't you?" Quote. Sign glanced at the lazy Ash sipping his drink, then at Fern, who seemed mildly displeased yet dutifully tidying Ash's clothes. Despite having known them for a while, Sign still couldn't figure out the dynamic between the two. In the end, he decided not to delve into it any further. Instead, he looked up at the sky, reached out as if to grasp the setting sun, and whispered, "It's a little late, but I have to act now, to seize the last remnants of my youth and dreams." Quote, "What is this guy doing? He's so childish," Ash muttered, unable to resist a complaint. Hearing this, Fern frowned slightly and gently chided him. "Master Ash, even if it's the truth, you shouldn't say such things. It's very bad to criticize someone in front of them." Quote, "Ash is so immature. You adults are just like me. Keeping things to yourselves," Frieren teased with a gloating smile as she flipped another page in her book. Although they both seemed to reprimand Ash, the strange banter among the three left Sign's face red with embarrassment. He retracted his hand, glaring at them with a mix of shame and irritation. "Now I finally understand why you three are companions." Quote, "Speaking of which, Fern, I feel like having barbecue tonight," Ash suddenly said. "Barbecue? Sure," Fern replied after a moment's thought, a smile forming on her face. "We're leaving tomorrow anyway, so let's have a good meal together before we go." Quote, Ash didn't pay any attention to Sign's embarrassment. Fern casually ignored him, and Frieren kept her head down, absorbed in her book, clearly uninterested in responding to Sign's complaints. "Your personalities are just so wonderful." Quote, as an uncle who had never felt this humiliated, not even if he were stripped down to his underwear, Sign gritted his teeth and squeezed out the words. At this moment, he deeply regretted his decision. Why did I join this bizarre team? But now, he realized he had no other choice. This was the only team in the village, and their strength was undeniably reliable. Beyond their peculiar personalities, there weren't any glaring flaws. So, no matter how reluctant he felt, Sign still set out with them the next morning, leaving the village he had called home his entire life. With the smiles and blessings of the villagers and his brother, he began a journey that was already 10 years overdue. After leaving the village, even with Sign's addition, the group's dynamics hardly changed. The journey proceeded unusually smoothly, despite the continuous chatter and chaos that accompanied them. However, I say, don't you feel like this team is missing something? Something very important. Sign, walking ahead, suddenly turned and asked the others with a serious expression. We've got Ash as the vanguard, and we've got magicians and priest as well. Frieren pondered for a moment, clearly considering the question. Fern, however, immediately offered a blunt response. A thief, right? After all, Lady Frieren always triggers treasure chest traps. No, I don't think a thief would be that useful. What we're really missing is a simple older sister, Ash replied bluntly. Before Fern could glare at him in disapproval, he quickly pointed at Sign. Of course, this isn't my opinion, it's clearly what he thinks, of course. Sign clenched his fists, his eyes brimming with tears as he took 2 steps forward. A sexy, mature older sister. It's not just me. Ash clearly wants one too. Wait, hold on. I didn't say that. Ash protested immediately, his irritation obvious. Master Ash, if you've got something to say, just say it outright. Fern placed her hands on her hips and stared sternly at him. I won't get angry. Really, just say it. Caught under Fern's unyielding gaze, Ash faltered. Awkwardly, he slung an arm over Frieren's shoulder and laughed dryly. Isn't Frieren here? Why would I possibly be thinking about some random older sister? Oh, Ash, have you finally recognized my charm as an older sister? Frieren glanced up at him, her expression lighting up with surprise and a hint of pride. She muttered to herself, "It must have been the flying kiss last time, right? Master wasn't lying after all. I'm a sinful woman. Yes, that one," Ash replied stiffly, forcing a nod. Seriously, does she actually believe this nonsense? Ash managed to keep his composure but suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to push Frieren off the nearby cliff and let her cool off in the river below. But before he could indulge in his thoughts, Fern spoke up, looking horrified. "Master Ash, are you a lolicon? I thought you were my comrade." Fern exclaimed, her voice a mix of shock and disappointment. "But I didn't expect you to be such a heretic. How can you agree with a guy like this?" Quote. Fern's indignation was innocent and uninformed, but Sign, noticing Ash's growing discomfort, decided to take advantage of the situation. Holding back his laughter, Sign put on a regretful expression and said, "It's a real shame. Who would have thought Ash would turn out this way?" Quote. Ash could only hang his head in frustration, silently lamenting his fate. Traveling with this chaotic group always seemed to end with him as the target of everyone's teasing. Chapter 103. 5. Restarted the curse of sleep. The unexpected awakener realizing that things were becoming unexpectedly troublesome, Ash sighed silently. Enduring everyone's gazes, he decided it wasn't worth arguing any further. Without another word, he quickened his pace, leaving the others behind as he strode to the front, hoping for a moment of solitude. In this season where warmth and cold mingled, Ash traveled along a path running beside the cliff. The afterglow of the setting sun brought a hint of spring's warmth, while the approaching night carried with it a biting, cold wind. The combination of the two created an unexpectedly pleasant atmosphere, one that unknowingly lifted his spirits. As he continued along the path, Ash soon noticed a village nestled in the mountains and forests not far away. From a distance, the village presented a quaint, picturesque scene. Stone houses were scattered in an orderly fashion, their orange-tiled roofs glowing softly under the fading sunlight. It wasn't extravagant, but it radiated the rustic simplicity and tranquility of a northern countryside. However, so quiet. Quote. Being the first to arrive, Ash couldn't help but notice the unusual silence enveloping the village. Even the wind seemed to tread lightly here, as if reluctant to disturb the stillness. He wandered through the empty streets, his confusion growing, until he rounded a corner and arrived at the village's small square. What greeted him made him stop abruptly. In the square and in front of the houses, the villagers lay scattered on the ground without exception. Some were curled up, others sprawled out, but none of them stirred. There was no sound, no cries, no groans. Though their chests rose and fell with slow, steady breaths, it was as if they were trapped in an unending dream. Ash quickly surveyed the area, his unease mounting as he realized the entire village had succumbed to this strange phenomenon. There was no chaos, no signs of struggle, only a chilling stillness, accompanied by the sight of countless sleeping figures. The others arrived shortly after, their reactions varied as they took in the eerie scene. Though the strange slumber was unsettling, Ash moved through the square with a calm composure. Sign, despite his often flustered demeanor, approached with the practiced diligence of a priest, crouching beside one of the fallen villagers to assess their condition. Meanwhile, Fern clung nervously to Ash's sleeve, her voice trembling slightly as she asked, "Master Ash, what's going on here?" "Curse," Ash replied simply. "Curse?" Fern echoed, her eyes widening. "I'll read you History of Magic before bed tonight," Ash teased with a faint smirk. "This time, I'll really read it. I mean it," Fern exclaimed, her face reddening in both determination and embarrassment. "Really?" Ash asked, raising an eyebrow skeptically. "Of course." Ash shook his head with a small chuckle. "You always say you'll change, but you're still the same, aren't you? I've told you so many times to go study it for yourself, but you never do. Honestly, who do you take after?" Quote. He ruffled her hair playfully, causing Frieren to purse her lips in frustration. She felt indignant, once again treated like a child. But if she puffed up her cheeks and threw a tantrum, it would only confirm his perception of her. "How can I prove I'm an adult?" she thought, enduring Ash's teasing. Embarrassed, she glanced over at Frieren for help. Frieren simply smiled, as if to say, "Next time you get angry at me, remember to forgive me just once." Finally, Frieren cleared her throat, breaking the moment. Among demons and monsters, there are many magics beyond the understanding of human magic techniques. These magics can cause various abnormal conditions, and we categorize such spells as curses. Is there really no way to fix this? Fern asked nervously, her expression tightening. Does this mean the village can't be saved? No, it's only human magic that doesn't work. The magic of the goddess is different, Frieren explained. I remember that the goddess magic is all written in the holy scriptures, Fern interjected. And in most cases, only priest can use it, right? Exactly, Frieren nodded. The magic of the goddess is similar to the magic of demons in one respect. Most of it is unsolved, and the principles remain completely unclear. Even priests rely on what's called the goddess's protection, which is entirely innate and cannot be gained later in life. As a result, it's nearly impossible for ordinary people to use the magic recorded in the scriptures. After finishing her explanation, Frieren's gaze shifted to Ash. He was sitting in someone else's house, casually eating a dinner prepared by the absent host, who, unfortunately, had fainted before they could eat it themselves. Frieren smiled teasingly. Of course, I said, nearly impossible, but it's even rarer for someone like Ash to be completely incapable of using it. I'm just sitting here eating quietly. Why are you dragging me into this? Ash looked up with an innocent expression, clearly wishing for a peaceful meal. Meanwhile, Fern, sitting beside him, stared at him for a long moment before sighing helplessly. Master Ash, is this someone else's meal? Quote, now that there's no owner, it belongs to me, Ash replied without hesitation. If you're hungry, I'll cook. It's not right to eat other people's food, Fern scolded gently. It's just a change of flavor, Ash said nonchalantly, taking another bite of chicken. He glanced at the unconscious woman on the ground and added, besides, this curse is troublesome. They might not wake up anytime soon. You should eat quickly. Makes it easier for us to leave right after. Lord Ash, if you keep this up, I'll really get angry. Though Fern's tone remained measured, there was a sternness in her voice. Ash waved a hand dismissively. I'm just kidding. Even if only to set a good example for you, I wouldn't simply leave them like this. Shouldn't you be the one providing help directly? Why does it fall to me? Fern grumbled, her face flushing slightly at Ash's teasing words. Ash didn't reply further, merely flashing a small smile as he continued eating the meal in front of her. A short while later, Sign returned from examining the villagers, his expression troubled. This is tricky. I can't determine exactly what kind of curse this is. I only know that it's a very unique one. Really? Ash, you've studied curses extensively, haven't you? Frieren asked, her eyes widening slightly as she turned to Ash. What kind of curse is this? Ash leaned back, thinking for a moment before answering. I've seen this before among the captive monsters kept in the Kingdom of Esther. If I'm not mistaken, this is the curse of the Chaos Flower subspecies. The Kingdom of Esther has those kinds of monsters? Frieren frowned, clearly disturbed. They really aren't afraid of getting overrun, are they? Captive or not, encountering such a monster without the proper precautions is a death sentence, she added grimly. Even a team of heroes wouldn't stand a chance if they didn't have a sea tower to counter the Chaos Flower. A single misstep would mean annihilation. Her words were not an exaggeration. A creature like the Chaos Flower could decimate even experienced adventurers. Frieren's expression grew more serious as she spoke. Even here, in this village, we're still within the Chaos Flower's range. If it were actively hunting us, none of us would stand a chance. Quote, Fern, too, could feel something unusual in the air, though the nature of the threat eluded her. Without the others pointing it out, she wouldn't have even realized they were under attack. Frieren had no idea how to dispel the curse, nor could she determine the source of the attack. Frustrated, she turned to Sign, who was equally troubled. How about you? Do you have a way to remove it? It's possible, Sign admitted after a pause. But it's troublesome. It requires a ritual and several specific props. Honestly, it'd be much easier to deal directly with the source of the curse. Can you locate the source? Frieren asked. I can narrow it down to a general direction. But that's our only option right now, Sign replied, shaking his head with a bitter smile. He lacked both the necessary materials and the time to perform the ritual properly. There was no alternative. The village was still under the curse's influence, and its effects were ongoing. Even Sign couldn't guarantee he wouldn't succumb if he took too long preparing. After all, the goddess's protection only made him resistant to the curse, it didn't grant full immunity. Deciding that removing the curse with the goddess's magic was too impractical, the group settled on tracking its source. Without delay, they set off toward the forest next to the village. The forest stretched far beyond the village, and the exact location of the curse's source remained unclear. By the time the group had made significant progress, night had fallen, and darkness enveloped the forest. Exhaustion began to take its toll. As magicians and priests, their physical endurance wasn't much better than that of ordinary people, so they had no choice but to take a short rest and prepare for potential battles ahead. Ash, seated by a small bonfire he had built to stave off the chill of the night, felt a faint tug at the corner of his clothes. Turning instinctively, he saw Fern, the purple-haired girl, struggling to keep her eyes open. She could barely lift her head, but her gaze remained fixed on him, her voice soft and unsteady. "Master Ash, what should I do? I don't think I can bear it anymore." "If you're sleepy, go ahead and rest," Ash said gently, smiling down at her. He placed a hand on her head, stroking it softly. "Don't worry, I'll wake you up when you're comfortable again." "Then please," she murmured, her lips curling into a faint, relieved smile. "I'll make your favorite breakfast tomorrow." Her words trailed off into a whisper. Before she could finish, she lost consciousness and slumped to the ground beside him. Even in her sleep, her small hand clung tightly to his clothes, refusing to let go. The sight reminded Ash of their childhood, nights when she would cling to him for comfort during restless dreams. Sign, observing the scene, couldn't hide his surprise. "This child trusts you so much, doesn't she? Even in a situation like this, she believed your words completely and found peace." Quote, "To be honest," Frieren interjected from where she was resting nearby, "I sometimes worry about that kid, Fern. I bet even if she's deceived by Ash someday, she'll still come up with excuses for him." She sighed and shook her head. Ash raised an eyebrow. "What? Are you jealous?" Quote, "Maybe a little," Frieren admitted with a smirk. "But I'm more concerned about what'll happen to her if you die. The thought gives me a headache. Even though I'm on good terms with Fern, I don't think I could ever take your place in her heart." Ash chuckled at her odd concern and shook his head. "What are you even talking about? Everyone is irreplaceable in someone else's heart. I couldn't replace you in hers either. No point worrying about it." "Really? I suppose that's true," Frieren conceded, watching as Ash carefully cut off the corner of his clothes and used it to wrap Fern. He laid her gently against a tree, draped a sheet over her, and cast a protective barrier around her small form. Although she still felt some unease about the future, Frieren couldn't help but let out a teasing smile. "But it's rare to hear you say something so sensible." Quote, "What kind of role do I play in your heart?" Ash asked, his expression caught between amusement and exasperation. "Well," Frieren tilted her head, pretending to think seriously, but she didn't offer an answer. Instead, she turned to Sign. "Speaking of which, Sign, can't your magic temporarily wake Fern up?" "It's a bit difficult," Sign admitted. "Without the proper ritual and necessary tools, I could wake her up, but it would only last about 5 seconds at most. Then don't use it now," Frieren advised. "I suppose that's for the best," Sign agreed, glancing at the girl sleeping soundly nearby. Even though she appeared peaceful, Sign couldn't shake his worry. As someone who hadn't yet succumbed to sleep, the situation weighed heavily on him. Despite knowing how strong Frieren was, it was hard to feel entirely at ease. After all, their group had not yet formed the kind of deep trust that would allow them to fully rely on each other in times like this. After Fern fell asleep, the group didn't rest long. Aware of the curse's worsening effects, they forced themselves to press on, pushing their tired bodies through the dense forest under the cover of night. Sign, leading the way, strained to locate the curse's source. The tension was palpable in his voice as he called out without turning his head, "We're almost there. The reaction is very close." "It's nearby. Is that so?" Frieren muttered weakly. She clung to the edge of Ash's clothes for support, her exhaustion evident in her slumped posture. "Sign, if you find the monster, wake me or Ash. You're a priest. Fighting isn't your strong suit." Her voice grew fainter as she added, "Don't fight it alone. Ash or I can fight. Even if it's just for 5 seconds. I can definitely." Before she could finish, her body gave out. Sign turned around in alarm just in time to see Frieren collapse like a kite with a snapped string. But before she hit the ground, Ash reacted swiftly, catching her in his arms. He carried her to a nearby tree, gently laying her down before casting a protective barrier around her. Really now, Ash muttered, his tone laced with mock annoyance as he looked at her unconscious form. If you couldn't hold on any longer, why didn't you say something earlier? Now I have to set the barrier twice. Sign stared at him in disbelief. He opened his mouth, hesitated, and then closed it again, struggling to articulate the growing unease Ash's behavior was stirring in him. It wasn't until a moment later that realization dawned. It wasn't just Frieren who had succumbed to the curse. Even the magicians of the legendary hero had fallen unconscious after walking through the cursed village. In fact, most warriors would have collapsed long ago. Yet Ash was completely fine. Despite hours of trekking through the cursed forest, he looked as energetic as ever. Finally, Sign couldn't hold back his astonishment. Wait a minute. You're a warrior, right? How is it that even legendary magicians have passed out, yet you, without the goddess's protection, are still awake and completely unaffected? Haven't I told you? I actually know a little magic, Ash replied nonchalantly, waving off the question as if it were unimportant. In truth, his endurance had little to do with magic. The real reason lay in his demonic lineage. Demons had a natural resistance to this type of curse, a necessity given their inability to receive the goddess's blessing or wield her magic. Without such resistance, demons would be helpless against monsters that used these kinds of abilities. Of course, this wasn't something he could explain to Sign. But Sign wasn't convinced. His skeptical gaze bore into Ash as he muttered, "A little magic? Are you seriously trying to pass this off as plausible? That explanation is an insult to my intelligence." Quote, Chapter 104. The promised morning. Ash's casual answer left Sign feeling duped, and he couldn't resist the urge to step forward and shake him by the shoulders. "A little? Just a little? Are you serious right now?" Quote. His words sounded more like a frustrated complaint than a genuine question, but before he could press further, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, as if something massive was approaching. The sudden quake made Sign abandon his interrogation. Instead, he scanned the surroundings cautiously, his voice tense as he said without turning, "Are you really sure about this? Let me make one thing clear. I only know a little bit of the goddess's combat magic. Don't expect me to defeat some monster capable of casting a curse of this level. It's fine. I'll figure something out when the time comes," Ash replied nonchalantly. "No. I'd better bring Frieren with me," Sign insisted, still uneasy. Despite Ash's apparent confidence, Sign couldn't bring himself to fully trust him. "With a magician as strong as her, I'd feel more at ease, even if she can only fight for 5 seconds. Quote, "You really don't trust me, huh? Do you have any accomplishments that would make me trust you?" "No, but we're companions. Shouldn't you have a little more faith in me?" Quote, "Absolutely not. If you can't handle this, the village and I are both doomed." Ash sighed, exasperated but understanding. Although he could resist the curse, Sign's insistence on involving Frieren was more a sign of his nervousness than a lack of faith. To reassure him, Ash removed the barrier and gently lifted Frieren into his arms. He chose not to explain. Sometimes, being nameless is more dangerous. Just like how nameless great demons are often the most fearsome. Sign, leading the way, clutched his holy book tightly and moved cautiously, his every step filled with tension. He tried to calm himself with deep breaths, his eyes darting around the forest in search of the source of the curse. The ominous atmosphere thickened, and Sign's nerves were wound tight. He didn't have to wait long, however. Soon, they entered a clearing, and Sign's eyes locked onto the true form of the monster responsible for the curse. It was, as Ash had speculated, a subspecies of the Chaos Flower. The creature's appearance was as bizarre as it was unnerving. A massive, vibrant flower bloomed at its top, its colorful petals glowing faintly. Below the flower was a network of twisting green vines and branches, resembling the legs of a standing octopus. Despite its plant-like nature and height of only 2 to 3 stories, it moved with an eerie grace, using its fragile-looking branches and leaves as makeshift feet to slide across the ground. Its body shimmered with a mirror-like sheen, amplifying its otherworldly presence. The goddess's 3 guns, though drenched in cold sweat, Sign didn't hesitate. The moment the monster seemed to notice them, he opened his holy book and unleashed his most powerful attack magic. 3 radiant golden beams tore through the air, aimed directly at the core nestled in the center of the Chaos Flower's petals. The spell was precise, designed to strike the target with lethal force. But to his shock, the chaos flower reacted with incredible speed. In an instant, it closed the small opening in its petals. 3 of its broad, glossy leaves moved with surgical precision, intercepting the golden beams. What happened next left Sign utterly stunned. The golden light, instead of penetrating the leaves, was refracted. The beams scattered into countless fragments, ricocheting into the surrounding forest like a dazzling meteor shower, leaving trails of light in their wake. How is this possible? It can actually reflect magic. Sign exclaimed, his voice laced with disbelief. He spun around, his wide eyes falling on Ash, who was calmly setting Frieren down beneath a nearby tree. Ash, unbothered by Sign's outburst, adjusted Frieren's position before standing and brushing off his hands. Seeing Ash's apparent lack of urgency, Sign couldn't contain his anxiety. He shouted, "Stop taking your time with Frieren. It can reflect magic. Hurry up." All right, don't be so nervous. Didn't I tell you I'd handle it?" Ash replied, shaking his head helplessly. At that moment, the chaos flower turned its attention to Ash. With surprising speed, it lashed out one of its massive, car-sized leaves in an attempt to crush him. Ash didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly raised a hand and waved it as if brushing away a minor inconvenience. Suddenly, a surge of purple lightning erupted from his fingertips, crackling like a violent storm. The tranquil night shattered under the deafening roar of energy. Boom! The chaos flower's reflective, mirror-like leaf was obliterated in an instant. The destructive force of the lightning didn't stop there. It surged forward like an unstoppable tide, tearing through the monster's body with merciless precision. In the blink of an eye, the chaos flower met an overwhelming and incomprehensible force. Its enormous form was utterly dismantled, shredded into unrecognizable pieces. For Sign, the scene was utterly surreal. Just moments earlier, he had been ready to mourn for Ash, assuming that using magic against a monster capable of reflecting it was tantamount to suicide. But the reality that unfolded before his eyes defied all logic. The ground beneath the chaos flower caved in as its body was crushed into fragments and buried in the earth. The sheer force of Ash's attack compressed the monster like an octopus under a hydraulic press. Beyond the area of destruction, debris and viscera were scattered like leaves in a storm. What remained was devastation. A crater filled with the remains of a creature that once radiated terror. Sign stood frozen, paralyzed by shock and fear. Even though Ash was on his side, the raw display of power made Sign's body tremble uncontrollably. His mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. When Sign finally recovered from his stunned state, he turned toward Ash. His eyes were wide, and his voice trembled as he said, "Is this what you call just a little magic?" Quote, "I said some magic," Ash replied casually, as though he'd just performed a mundane task. "How can this even be magic?" Sign exclaimed, rushing forward in disbelief. Grabbing Ash by the shoulders, he shook him vigorously. "I've never seen anything as exaggerated as this in my life. Don't be so dramatic. Isn't this your first time out of the village? What kind of magic could you have seen?" Ash teased, his tone light-hearted. "Even so, I still have common sense." "Really? But I told you at the start. I'm pretty capable." "You're the one who didn't believe me," Ash countered, smirking. No. This isn't even within the realm of capable," Sign protested, shaking his head frantically like a rattle. Ash chuckled at Sign's exaggerated reaction, shaking his head. "Don't sweat the details. At the end of the day, it's your fault for doubting me in the first place. I'm not interested in whose fault it is. Even if I was wrong, how did you do it? That thing could clearly reflect magic, right?" Sign asked, his voice tinged with lingering disbelief. Ash offered a simple explanation. "All I had to do was exceed the threshold of its reflective capacity." "That's so easy to say." Quote, "It's actually pretty simple," Ash replied with a shrug. "Damn it. He's one of those naturally strong types, isn't he?" Sign muttered under his breath, his frustration clear. "Well, I am considered strong," Ash admitted with a grin. "I'm so jealous," Sign cried, throwing his hands up in exasperation. Sign let out a deep sigh. Not just a simple one, but the kind that spoke volumes of genuine envy. He felt so jealous that he half-jokingly wanted to bite a handkerchief to vent his frustration. Seeing Sign's exaggerated reaction, Ash couldn't help but feel amused. Although he didn't think it was worth bragging to this wine-drinking, meat-eating priest, a smug expression crept onto his face, and he decided to provoke him further. Of course, Ash didn't explain the mechanics of his attack. He hadn't mentioned how his magic, with its layered breakthroughs, or the oppressive force of his thunder spell worked. It wasn't necessary. Pure magical prowess was enough to overwhelm. After a moment of envy and awe, Sign finally regained some semblance of composure. While he couldn't completely recover from his shock, he managed to steady himself and stared at Ash with a newfound respect, as though his opinion of the man had undergone a complete transformation. "You're already insanely strong, aren't you? So, why do you keep pushing yourself so hard?" Quote, "So that one day, I can conquer this world, of course," Ash replied with a playful smirk. "What's this? Some grand declaration of world domination?" Sign couldn't help but laugh, shaking his head. "The world is so peaceful now. What are you even talking about? Is it really peaceful?" Ash asked, his tone still light-hearted. "Well, at least for the most part, it seems peaceful. Probably." Sign trailed off. As someone who had spent his whole life in the village, he lowered his head in thought, clearly struggling to reconcile his limited knowledge with the broader world. Meanwhile, Ash remained unfazed. He casually picked up Frieren, still fast asleep on the ground, and hoisted her over his shoulder without bothering to wake her. Without looking back, he started heading into the forest. "I was just kidding. Let's get back quickly." "Of course, I know it's a joke," Sign muttered, sighing bitterly as he followed. "But coming from you, that kind of joke doesn't feel all that funny." As they walked back, Sign couldn't help but stare at Ash's back. A thought crept into his mind: if Ash ever turned into a villain, who in this world could possibly stop him? He couldn't come up with an answer. Ultimately, Sign could only dismiss the thought, chalking it up to a ridiculous joke. It's just a joke, right? Quote. Though reason told him it must be a joke, Sign couldn't shake an odd, inexplicable sense of unease. Still, unable to think of any way to resolve such a situation, he vigorously shook his head and pushed the thought out of his mind. Since Ash didn't wake Frieren or Fern, the two slept peacefully through the night, aided by the lingering effects of the Chaos Flower. Early morning. As the sunlight gently brushed against her face, Fern slowly opened her eyes, hazy with sleep. The warm glow of the sun brought a comforting sensation, as though dispelling the fatigue of the previous night. Before her, the serene beauty of the forest unfolded like a living painting, bathed in the soft light of dawn. She stretched with a satisfied hum, savoring the moment. Gradually, her mind cleared, and she remembered the events of the previous night. Looking around instinctively, her gaze landed on Ash sitting nearby, casually reading a book. When Ash noticed her, he lifted his head and greeted Fern with his usual gentle smile. "Good morning, Fern. Looks like you had a good sleep." "Yes. Good morning, Master Ash," Fern replied, her voice warm and sincere. The uneasiness from the night before had completely dissipated. Instead, an indescribable sense of comfort and gratitude filled her heart. A broad smile spread across her face as she looked at Ash. This scene didn't escape Sign's notice. He glanced at Frieren, who rarely woke up early, and hurried over with an unusually serious expression. "I have to ask, are those two really not married yet? What on earth are you talking about so early in the morning?" Frieren rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "At least act like a clergyman and stop thinking about such nonsense." Quote. Still half asleep, Frieren regarded Sign with a look that suggested he was beyond hope. Sign, chastised, briefly doubted himself. Maybe the problem really lies with me, he thought, though the idea passed quickly, replaced by new emotions. As the team's representative and its sole priest, Sign took on the responsibility of waking the cursed villagers who had fallen into an unnaturally deep sleep. When the villagers awoke, their gratitude was directed toward him, particularly from an elder sister who spoke on behalf of the village. Her gentle smile and heartfelt thanks banished all of Sign's earlier worries and confusion. By the time they left the village to resume their journey, Sign's face still held a faint blush, and the corners of his mouth remained curved in a blissful smile. That feeling of happiness lingered for an uncomfortably long time, much to the irritation of the others. "Master Sign, this is so gross," Fern muttered with disdain. "A reliable master should be someone like Master Ash. Upright and powerful." Quote. She cast a scornful glance at Sign before turning to Ash with a smile full of respect, and perhaps a subtle warmth that was difficult to miss. Frieren, stroking her chin thoughtfully, decided to join the discussion. I don't think either of them is normal. But, if I really think about it, Ash is slightly more normal. Quote. Sign, however, was far too immersed in his elation to notice their cutting remarks. Caught up in his excitement, he enthusiastically approached Ash, slung an arm around his shoulders, and grinned conspiratorially. Hey, don't you think that big sister was amazing? Quote. How exactly am I supposed to answer that? Ash muttered. The pointed stares from Fern and Frieren behind him made Ash uneasy. He had no intention of getting dragged into this ridiculous conversation, knowing full well that any agreement would earn him the same disdain currently directed at Sign. Ah, they're just kids. Why are you so hesitant, Dad? A real man needs to be shameless. Quote. If you like her so much, why don't you stay in that village? Ash retorted dryly. I want to. But, she's already married. Sign wailed, clenching his fists dramatically. He regretted it so much that he pounded his chest and stamped his feet. If I'd known, I should have left the village a few years earlier. Then I would have been the one to marry her. You've really thought this through. But aren't priests forbidden from marrying? Oh, come on, you might as well say priests can't smoke, drink, eat meat, or gamble, too. Quote. Fair enough, you win. Quote. Faced with Sign's unrestrained personality, Ash was momentarily at a loss for words. Even he didn't know how to respond. Given how outrageous Sign already was, the idea of him breaking another rule wasn't all that surprising. However, the icy gazes from behind made Ash increasingly uncomfortable. Somehow, just participating in this conversation had managed to implicate him in Sign's nonsense. Chapter 104. 5. Old battlefield grudges. The nobles seeking revenge. Not long after leaving the village and heading north, the group arrived in Vorig, a fortress city near the Kingdom of Esther. For travelers, Vorig served as the main transit point to the famed Magic City. This is the last major city before reaching the Magic City, Ash remarked. If you need anything specific, this is your last chance to get it. Quote. Frieren, who was quite familiar with this area, glanced at the fortress city in the distance and naturally offered guidance to the group, speaking with the authority of someone who had been here before. This is the last chance to prepare. Make sure you're ready before we head to the Magic City, she reminded them. However, Fern's face darkened as she pulled out her purse and inspected its contents. Lady Frieren, we're out of travel funds. Without using Lord Ash's money, we won't even have a place to stay tonight, let alone buy anything unusual. Except Ash's money. No way, Frieren replied, visibly distressed as she frowned in thought. If we rely on him the whole way, I'll never hear the end of it. He'll tease me mercilessly later. Quote. Despite her response, she didn't seem to arrive at a solid conclusion. Suddenly, her gaze shifted to the road behind them, her expression growing serious. A noble's carriage had come to a halt nearby. The occupants, a butler-like old man, a one-eyed middle-aged man with an aristocratic air, and a young man with slick-back red hair, were staring at them with undisguised hostility. The young man, in particular, bore a striking resemblance to the second son of the village chief they had recently encountered, though his polished demeanor and hairstyle marked him as a noble. Frieren, are they your enemies? Sign asked, glancing at her with suspicion. Knowing she'd been to this region before, he assumed she might have crossed paths with them. Frieren tilted her head in confusion, clearly uncertain. I don't like the owner of this territory, but I don't think I've offended any nobles. Quote. But if you don't like them, that probably means you offended them without realizing it, right? Fern interjected nervously. Having grown up under Ash's tutelage, Fern had been educated to tread carefully around nobles. Her wariness deepened when she noticed all three figures had their hands resting on their weapons. Her instincts told her to flee. Before any of them could act, the red-haired boy stepped forward. He removed his gloves with deliberate ceremony and threw them at Ash's feet. Is he challenging Lord Ash? Fern blinked in confusion. Did he throw it at the wrong person? Closing parenthesis quote. Sign muttered under his breath, crouching down to pick up the gloves. Without thinking, he placed them at Frieren's feet. This strange act made Frieren scowl in frustration. What are you doing? Why are you dragging me into this? Just give them to Ash and let him deal with it. Quote. Before Sign could respond, the boy's voice rang out, sharp and angry. You let your servant throw the gloves that symbolize a duel at a child's feet. Do you lack even the courage to accept a challenge properly? Huh. So it is Master Ash you're after? Fern asked, still puzzled. Wait, hold on. I'm a priest. Why am I being called a servant? Sign protested, clearly offended. And I'm a child? Fern's voice was tinged with disbelief. The three of them stood there, varying degrees of shock and bewilderment evident on their faces. Only Ash remained composed, his expression unchanging as he calmly studied the boy before him. After a moment, he spread his hands in exasperation. Sorry, you must have the wrong person. I don't think I know you, Ash said simply. You may not know me, but I know you. The boy spat angrily. You're the one who took my father's eyes. Is that so? Who's your father again? Ash asked, tilting his head in feigned curiosity. One of the three great knights of the northern countries, the head of the Vorig family, Orden. Quote, Orden, was it? Ash said, as though he'd just remembered something. Fern tugged uneasily at Ash's sleeve, her face pale. Lord Ash, what's going on? Did you accidentally hurt a noble named Orden? No, you misunderstood. I have no memory of that name whatsoever. I only pretended to recognize it, Ash said casually, waving his hand dismissively. You bastard! The boy's face flushed with anger as he prepared to attack. However, before he could act, his father, Orden, a middle-aged man with a knife scar running down the right side of his face and a black eye patch, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Wirt, stand down. You are no match for him, Orden commanded with a grave tone. Father. Wirt's voice trembled with frustration and disbelief. You are indeed a skilled warrior, but this man, he's beyond your current ability, Orden said, shaking his head. He turned his gaze toward Ash, his voice tense as he asked, Why are you here in my territory? Why not remain in the kingdom of Esther? Quote, It's just part of the journey, Ash replied nonchalantly. Are you sure you're not mistaking me for someone else? Orden's grip on his sword tightened as he ignored the question. You don't remember? Let me remind you. His voice grew heavier as he recounted, 13 years ago, outside Kaga Pass near the magic city of the Esther Kingdom, during a border skirmish where Esther used monsters in combat, I was about to kill a rock dragon. You appeared out of nowhere and took my eye with a single strike. Quote, the weight of his words hung in the air as he recounted the battle, a conflict that left him disfigured and humiliated. His one remaining eye bore into Ash with unrelenting anger, his knuckles white around the hilt of his sword. Yet, despite the seething rage bubbling within him, Orden held himself back. He knew all too well that the man standing before him wasn't an ordinary adventurer. Ash's presence suggested someone of high rank from the enemy nation, a figure who wouldn't hesitate to slaughter them all if provoked. If a fight broke out now, neither he nor his men would have a chance of survival. In the years that followed, relations between humans and demons had grown unusually restrained. Conflict between the two sides had decreased to the lowest point in recorded history. On the surface, this should have been a blessing. Yet, as wars with demons waned, tensions among human nations escalated. With no common enemy to unite them, rulers turned their ambitions toward each other. While these wars weren't uncommon even during the demon skirmishes, the lack of demonic interference fueled greater fervor and conflict among nations. For nobles in border regions, this meant serving as the vanguard in any disputes. Regardless of the opponent, be it human or demon, the duty of leading the charge always fell to them. 13 years ago, Orden had been tasked with such a duty. At the time, the Kingdom of Esther had drawn the ire of neighboring nations. Fearing Esther's expansionist ambitions, several countries formed a coalition to contain them. Orden's role was to provoke minor skirmishes along the border at Kaga Pass, diverting part of Esther's forces and tying them down. His orders were simple: create friction without escalating to full-scale war. However, events quickly spiraled beyond his expectations. The Kingdom of Esther unilaterally declared the area within a 10-kilometer radius of Kaga Pass as a demilitarized buffer zone, warning other nations not to approach with armed forces. This is preposterous, Orden roared, slamming his fist on the table as he read the decree. Though his initial orders had been to provoke Esther, their blatant arrogance left him fuming. Driven by both frustration and defiance, Orden made a bold decision. He ordered his entire force to march into the so-called buffer zone, deliberately provoking Esther's wrath. The preparations for the siege were far from complete. Auden had no intention of bearing the heavy losses that a siege would entail. Sacrificing his family's elite troops in such a futile endeavor could leave his house vulnerable upon returning to the kingdom, making it an easy target for rival nobles to exploit, or even outright annex. The arrival of his large army served a dual purpose, showcasing his strength while signaling a firm and unyielding stance. Yet, the unfolding events far exceeded anything he could have anticipated. In the dead of night, the gates of the enemy's pass suddenly creaked open. Without warning, a massive force surged out, knights, soldiers, monsters, and several dragons pouring forth like an unstoppable tide. The Vorig troops, caught off guard, were thrown into disarray. Chaos consumed the camp as the swift advance of cavalry and monsters shattered their defensive line with terrifying ease. Auden, one of the 3 great knights of the mountain, was jolted awake by the commotion. Without hesitation, he grabbed his sword and rushed to the front line, confronting a rock dragon that was slaughtering his men with savage abandon. With his unmatched combat prowess, Auden managed to halt the dragon's rampage. Supported by his most loyal men, he even forced the dragon warrior into a desperate position. Victory seemed within his grasp. But then, quote, a surge of instinctual dread forced Auden to pull back at the very last moment, leaping away just as he was about to land the finishing blow on the dragon. The next instant, a white arc of light sliced through the air. The scythe-like slash carried an overwhelming, murderous intent, grazing Auden's cheek and spilling blood in its wake. The brutal strike left a deep, horrific wound across his face. Tragically, his right eye was the victim of the attack, reduced to a mangled, bloody mess. The sight was gruesome, but had he not reacted in time, the blow would have surely taken his head. Through the haze of pain and terror, Auden's gaze locked onto his attacker, a seemingly young boy. I even caught you off guard, but you still managed to dodge. Not bad, the boy said, his voice calm and indifferent. Ash, the boy in question, hadn't intended to intervene initially. He was only trying to save the dragon, which he had been hunting. Sighing in mild disappointment at losing his prey, he made no further moves, his demeanor utterly nonchalant. However, this casual attitude only served to infuriate Auden. The boy's cold indifference toward the lives he had taken was chilling, his presence utterly alien to the battlefield's chaos. You bastard! Auden roared. Kill him. Quote, before Auden could intervene, dozens of knights charged at Ash, their battle cries echoing across the field. What followed was nothing short of a massacre. The knights, brave and resolute on any battlefield, proved no match for Ash. They fell like leaves in a storm, their lives extinguished with terrifying ease. Ash didn't even spare them a glance. His movements were fluid and precise, each swing of his blade exuding a sense of mockery toward the knight's futile bravery. The air shimmered with silver arcs as his sword cut through flesh and armor alike, leaving trails of death in its wake. One by one, the knights fell, reduced to lifeless husks. The battlefield, which should have been a place of valor and resistance, became a stage for a chillingly one-sided slaughter. Ash's efficiency was ruthless, his strikes too swift and decisive to counter. The air grew cold with the stench of blood, the sounds of battle replaced by the sickening thuds of bodies hitting the ground and the occasional, heart-wrenching cries of the fallen. Auden, dragged away from the carnage by his men, could only watch in powerless horror. Humiliation burned in his heart as he witnessed the scene before him, a scene of unparalleled cruelty and merciless efficiency. In this bold counterattack, which turned passivity into initiative and demonstrated overwhelming force, the warlike Lord Vorig was utterly unprepared and defeated without even donning his armor. The sheer decisiveness of his defeat shocked other nations, forcing them to suppress their own impulses for preemptive strikes. Although occasional skirmishes persisted between the Kingdom of Esther and neighboring nations, no large-scale wars erupted. For the next 13 years, an uneasy but enduring peace held sway. Even after more than a decade, Auden, who had commissioned a portrait of Ash, could not erase the humiliation of that fateful day from his memory. The heart-stopping massacre and Ash's terrifying strength were forever etched into his mind. Despite the carnage being anything but astonishing, Auden found himself recalling the boy who had robbed him of his eye and ended his career as a warrior. Fate, however, seemed to have other plans. On an otherwise routine outing with his eldest son, Auden unexpectedly crossed paths with him, the boy who had not aged a day in more than 10 years. It defied belief that the young man remained unchanged after all these years, but Auden's warrior instincts left no doubt. The aura of danger emanating from the boy confirmed it. This was the same person who had nearly ended his life on the battlefield all those years ago. To you, I was probably just another weak opponent you could defeat with ease, Auden said slowly, his intense gaze fixed on Ash. But back then, when I dodged that fatal strike and managed to retreat, you seemed surprised. And yet, you let me go, treating me as a nobody. Quote, now that you put it that way, I do remember, Ash replied, his tone nonchalant. But don't phrase it so harshly. I just didn't see the need for more unnecessary bloodshed. Quote, as Auden detailed the time, place, and events of that day, Ash finally pieced together the memory from 13 years prior. He had indeed gone to observe the battlefield that year, as it marked the debut of controlled dragons in border skirmishes. However, while protecting one such dragon, he had launched a sneak attack on an enemy warrior, only for the man to evade his killing blow. At the time, Ash had been mildly surprised by Auden's quick reflexes. But his priority had been safeguarding the dragon, and he had no interest in wasting time on a single opponent. Instead, it was the knights who repeatedly charged at him, forcing his hand, a situation that left him more annoyed than anything else. Ash's seemingly casual explanation only deepened Auden's frustration. Gritting his teeth, he snapped, not wanting to cause unnecessary bloodshed. At that time, you could have. I was merely brushing off the sparks that happened to land on me, Ash interjected smoothly, cutting Auden off before he could finish. Turning to his companions, he continued, after all, I didn't actively attack them. They charged at me, and I defended myself. It was a battlefield, after all. Did you expect the enemy to simply stand by and do nothing? Indeed, Auden exhaled heavily, as though letting go of a long-held burden. Perhaps he saw little point in continuing this confrontation. Resigned, he tugged at his son's arm and turned away, heading toward the waiting carriage. It's hardly chivalrous to pursue a battlefield grudge outside its bounds, he muttered. Leave Vorig immediately, before I change my mind. Quote, at times like this, isn't it customary to set aside our differences and shake hands in peace? After all, this isn't the battlefield anymore, Ash retorted lightly, his voice carrying an air of detached amusement. But Auden and his son didn't look back. Instead, they climbed into the carriage with a final snort of disdain, the tension still palpable as they hurried back to the city. As the carriage disappeared into the distance, Ash found his troubles far from over. Behind him, 3 sets of eyes were fixed on him, each gaze filled with curiosity and unease. Chapter 105. The old man forgotten in time. In the Middle Ages, nobles placed immense importance on their social status and dignity. Even in the relatively peaceful central regions, it was considered a capital crime for commoners to show disrespect to the nobility. Border nobles, however, were a different breed. They relied heavily on force to establish their standing and placed extraordinary value on honor. For many among the warlike factions of these border territories, maintaining their family's reputation was worth sacrificing their lives. Unfortunately for Auden, his son was present during the confrontation. Though he had initially steeled himself for revenge, the presence of his child ultimately led him to back down. There was little choice in the matter. While Ash initially appeared to be a retired adventurer, his behavior told a very different story. He showed no deference to nobles, nor did he carry himself as someone who would surrender easily. Under these circumstances, even if Auden and 2 others joined forces, there was no guarantee they could defeat him. Worse still, failure might invite retaliation, leaving Auden's family territory vulnerable to invasion or even annexation by a neighboring kingdom. Ash's demeanor and actions suggested that he held a high-ranking position in an enemy nation rather than the persona of a mere adventurer. Despite the humiliation, Auden chose retreat over confrontation. Yet Ash, observing this sudden withdrawal after such fiery words, found himself puzzled. While avoiding a fight might have been the best outcome, especially with Auden's child present, Ash couldn't help but feel something was amiss. Even after taking the initiative to leave potential trouble behind, the 3 people accompanying him now gazed at him with strange expressions. Fern, in particular, was the first to break the silence. Once the carriage carrying Auden and his son disappeared, she exhaled deeply, patting her chest as if to calm herself. Then, she pursed her lips and turned to Ash with a pointed glare. Master Ash, is there something else you're hiding from us? Haven't I heard this question before? Ash tilted his head slightly, gazing skyward at a 45-degree angle. I feel like I've answered it before, too. Quote, because every time, you reveal something new and shocking that we've never heard of. Fern's voice rose with frustration. And it's always something incredible. Her concern was palpable. If Ash kept revealing secrets like this, she feared her heart might not be able to take it. Ash spread his hands in an exaggerated show of innocence. I didn't hide anything intentionally. You just never asked, did you? You were in the military. Yes, Ash replied matter-of-factly. I even went to the battlefield and accidentally left someone with a scar. His frankness, paired with his complete lack of reservation, left Fern momentarily speechless. She couldn't decide whether his answer was an attempt to avoid the deeper issue or merely his way of brushing it off. Sign, meanwhile, stared at him with a mix of disbelief and exasperation. You actually joined the army? You fought against someone as important as him? And there's still bad blood between you two? Are you not afraid of being hunted down? How do you have the nerve to just wander into someone else's territory? Frieren, who had been silent until now, shook her head with a sigh. Let's get out of here quickly. I really don't want to get caught in some military pursuit, she said, already starting to walk ahead of the group. Her tone betrayed her concern. Whatever Ash had done in the past, staying in this region for too long could spell disaster. Leaving as soon as possible seemed like the safest option. The group's concerns centered on one pressing issue. What if Auden refused to let the matter drop and sent a large force to hunt them down? Such a provocation could easily enrage Ash, and if that happened, the nearby fortress city would likely be reduced to rubble. Frieren doubted that the fortress could withstand someone like Ash, who might even overpower her formidable magic. She wasn't naive enough to condemn soldiers for their actions on the battlefield. Her priority was saving lives and avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. After leaving the fortress city of Vorig, the group traveled swiftly until they found a suitable spot by the river to rest. While they relaxed, Frieren couldn't suppress her curiosity any longer. Ash, tell me the truth. What have you been doing all these years? Fern quickly added her own frustration. We agreed to build an apple orchard. But now, have you gone and become a general or something? She seemed certain that Ash was hiding something from her. Sign, still unsettled by the earlier encounter, shuddered as he recalled the noble youth's hostile gaze. What have you done? I thought for sure I was about to lose my head. Quote. Ash held up a hand to calm the barrage of questions. Wait a minute. All of you. You're hitting me with so many questions at once. Where do I even start? And Sign, your panic isn't even my problem. Honestly, I'm more shocked by your behavior than anything else. He glanced at Frieren and, with a wry grin, couldn't resist commenting. Speaking of shock, Sign, you're definitely the most uninhibited person I've ever met. Quote. And you're the most reckless person I've ever met, Frieren retorted without hesitation, clearly unimpressed. The Vorig family is known for being rude and unreasonable. Since you clearly have a grudge against them, why would you walk into their territory? Ash tilted his head slightly, puzzled. Is that really my fault? I didn't even know I had a grudge against them. You make a fair point, Frieren admitted begrudgingly, holding her forehead in exasperation. Ash's matter-of-fact response was frustrating in its simplicity. It was only now that he began to recall fragments of his complicated history, though his tone made it clear he wasn't entirely sure of the details himself. Suppressing the urge to complain, Frieren sighed and pressed on. All right, then, who do you have a grudge against? Could you just explain everything at once? Ash shrugged. I'd love to, but the situation, how can I even put it into words? What do you mean by that? Ash gave her a wry smile. Think about it. Can you remember how much bread you've eaten in your life? The unexpected analogy left Frieren momentarily speechless, her frustration simmering beneath the surface. Sign wiped sweat from his brow, clearly struggling to follow the conversation. Wait a second. What are you even talking about? Is this really a question? Quote. All right, let me try again, Ash replied. Can you remember how many times you've lost money? Actually, yes, I can. But I also remember the times I've won. Sign said triumphantly, as if he had uncovered some profound insight. Ash chuckled and gave Sign an encouraging pat on the shoulder. Very good. Go celebrate your victories. And maybe try not to gamble next time. Without waiting for a response, Ash gave Sign a gentle push toward the riverbank. The motion sent Sign stumbling down the hill, nearly tumbling into the water. Well, at least that's one less question to deal with, Ash muttered under his breath. But as he turned back, he was met with the unyielding stares of the two women. With a resigned sigh, he raised his hands in mock surrender. Fine, fine, I'll answer. Fern, remember when you asked about my past? Here's the truth. I know a few high-ranking officials in the Kingdom of Esther. Occasionally, I've helped them out. I'm not a general or anything, though. At most, I've been involved in some significant matters. Fern's eyes narrowed. I thought there was something off about how you knew so much about Esther's monster army. So, you're not just an observer. You actually participated in all this? Her voice rose slightly as realization dawned. Wait. Don't tell me you're the one who came up with that ridiculous plan. Quote. When she noticed Ash abruptly turning his head away, Frieren couldn't help but step forward quickly. Standing on tiptoe, she stared directly into his eyes. Her youthful face, unchanged through countless years yet still holding a hint of childishness, now displayed an unusual seriousness. It was as if this matter would not rest until he gave her a proper answer. Ash glanced toward Fern for assistance, but her expression mirrored Frieren's stern gaze. With no allies in sight, he sighed and gave up. Fine. Actually, I am the leader of this plan. It's true. Frieren's eyes widened in disbelief, while Fern's face twisted in visible worry. Master Ash, why would you get involved in something like this? Quote. For world peace, of course, Ash replied without hesitation. But you're clearly using monsters to fight humans. Frieren retorted, her tone incredulous. To her, his reasoning sounded more like an excuse. True. Ash said nonchalantly. But even if my methods involve such means, think about the peace this kingdom has enjoyed in recent years. When do you think this so-called witch will finally disappear? Quote. This. Frieren paused, caught off guard by his casual explanation. She thought carefully about his words and realized, much to her frustration, that he wasn't entirely wrong. For all the danger and bloodshed his methods might cause, the end result oddly seemed beneficial. It felt counterintuitive, but the facts supported his claim. She found herself momentarily speechless. Fern, however, couldn't accept it so easily. Why didn't you ever say anything before? My lady, Ash began, his tone matter of fact. Sometimes, when you're working toward a goal, you take on responsibilities without even realizing it. Isn't that the way of things? It's not like you'd go home and talk to your kids about your workday, complaining about every little thing, would you? I'm not a child anymore, Fern muttered indignantly. It's all the same to me, Ash replied with a smile, ruffling her hair playfully. Without waiting for a response, he turned and began walking ahead. Fern puffed up her cheeks in frustration. Master Ash, you're still hiding so much from me. You've never talked about your dreams or what responsibilities you carry. I don't know anything about you. Quote. Frieren, on the other hand, remained expressionless as she stared at Ash's retreating figure. That guy ran away again. Lady Frieren, tell me. Fern demanded, turning to her. What else is Master Ash hiding from me? Me? Don't ask me. How would I know what's going on with that guy? Frieren replied, raising an eyebrow. But haven't you known him for a long time? That's true, Frieren admitted, but even I know very little about him. Fern's sudden focus on her left Frieren feeling unfairly targeted. She had once tried to understand Ash better herself, only to discover how enigmatic he truly was. He seemed constantly wrapped in an invisible veil, making it nearly impossible to see the full picture. At first, she thought she had all the time in the world to figure him out. Now, she felt too exhausted to bother delving deeper. All she could do was wait for him to reveal things on his own. But there was one thing she now understood more clearly. Ash was influencing and reshaping the world in his own peculiar way. Whether the results of his actions would ultimately be good or bad was still uncertain. Yet, from the current perspective of this kingdom, his efforts seemed to have borne positive results, for now. For the sake of the Vorig family and the innocent people in the nearby fortress city, Frieren hurriedly pulled Ash and the others away, ensuring they left the Vorig family's territory. They passed through the Kaga Pass of the Kingdom of Esther and entered its territory. During this journey, Fern kept scrutinizing the soldiers at the checkpoint, hoping to spot someone who might recognize Ash and reveal some clues about him. Unfortunately, the soldiers stationed there had been replaced several times over the past decade, leaving her efforts fruitless. Disappointed, she let out a sigh. Once they entered the pass, the group took a detour to a plain in a direction opposite the magical city. Frieren seemed particularly delighted during this leg of the journey, her long ears drooping slightly in joy. Seeing Frieren like this, even Fern's lingering dissatisfaction from the past few days began to fade. A small smile crept onto her face as she remarked, "Lady Frieren looks so happy. That's rare. Well, I'm about to see an old friend Tilda. I'd like to have a proper chat with him before he dies." "Tilda," Frieren replied, her cheerful tone laced with casual morbidity. Her words made it difficult for the others to respond. Fern and Sign exchanged awkward glances, unsure of how to react. Frieren, however, seemed entirely unbothered and continued muttering to herself, "Maybe I should stay for 10 years, Tilda." "No, only a week at most." Fern interjected, her voice firm. "Fern, you're so stingy," Frieren pouted. "It's not just me. Lord Ash would find it troubling too, wouldn't he?" Fern replied seriously, turning to Ash with a pointed expression. Caught off guard by the sudden scrutiny, Ash had no choice but to nod in agreement. "Isn't that a threat?" Frieren grumbled. Despite her complaint, she noticed Fern's determined look and reluctantly nodded her agreement, unwilling to provoke any further displeasure. Under this light-hearted yet tense atmosphere, the group soon arrived at their destination. The plain before them was picturesque, resembling a scene straight out of a painting. Nestled within it was a quaint village that seemed plucked from the pages of a fairy tale. Unlike the fortified walls of the Sword Village, this village's entrance was marked only by a simple wooden frame, lacking even a proper gate. There were no defensive walls surrounding it, only low wooden fences that seemed more suited to keeping children and poultry contained than warding off intruders. At the village entrance, an elderly dwarf sat quietly on a stone. He wore a bright red battle robe and a knight's helmet. Beside him rested a short sword, standing guard like a silent sentinel. The years were etched deeply into his face, his beard as white as snow. With his eyes closed, he seemed to be lost in a long, unbroken dream. "Master Vol, it's been so long!" Frieren exclaimed as she approached him briskly, her eyes sparkling with the joy of reunion. Turning to her companions, she added, "Look. Just as I said before, doesn't he look like a seasoned warrior? Isn't he handsome? ... Who? ... When Lord Vol slowly opened his eyes, there was a flicker of confusion in his gaze, as though he didn't recognize Frieren. This prompted Sign, standing nearby, to joke, "Isn't he just a confused old man you'd find anywhere?" "You're so rude," Ash began. "Even I wouldn't call someone old. Ouch." Before he could finish his retort, the old man suddenly swung his sword at Ash's feet. However, Ash reacted swiftly, lifting his leg and stomping down on the blade before it could strike. The force of Ash's movement drove the sword into the ground with a sharp crack. Master Vol, failing to maintain his grip on the hilt, was left staring at the embedded weapon in surprise. Ash, meanwhile, remained calm, studying the situation thoughtfully. Did you try this same trick the last time I came here?" "Vol's tactics are as despicable as ever," Frieren said with an amused smile. The sudden attack didn't seem to surprise her in the least. In fact, she couldn't help but laugh. "But they've never worked on Ash." Chapter 105. 5. Trying to show his claws to the world. "A large number of people died due to negligence in battle, yet you didn't leave a single flaw. You truly are a veteran warrior." As Ash picked up the sword with his toes and handed it back, Master Fulu took it with a weathered smile, resting it beside him. "Welcome, Frieren, Ash. Stay as long as you like." "I want to stay for 10 years, Frieren replied without hesitation, then added with a mischievous grin, "Please ask the village chief to recommend a job for me." Before she could say another word, Ash grabbed her by the back of her collar, dragging her unceremoniously into the village. Without even glancing back, he stated firmly, "Don't cause trouble. Fern will get angry." "Ash, you're such a disappointment," Frieren quipped, pretending to pout. "I can't believe you've compromised with a child." "Then go convince her yourself," Ash retorted flatly. "Never mind," she said after a brief pause. Crossing her arms over her chest with mock dignity, she added, "It's the responsibility of adults to indulge a child's willfulness occasionally." Ash didn't bother to look back as he kept walking, replying casually, "You're shameless. Weren't you saying something completely different just now? And now you're changing your tune." Quote, "Why don't you say it? Stop messing around," Ash sighed. "All you're doing is creating trouble and giving people something to gossip about." Quote, "That's because you lack confidence," Frieren shot back. "If you're so confident, go ahead," Ash challenged. "That's exactly why I let you handle it. Because I'm not," she admitted with a smirk. The two continued bickering as they walked, their banter as familiar as an old routine. Fern, already used to their antics, chose not to intervene. Instead, she politely bowed to the old man at the entrance before hurrying to catch up with them. Through the village chief's introduction, and with Master Fulu's influence, the group quickly found short-term jobs in the village. They were even offered free lodging in a guest house usually reserved for traveling merchants. Having traveled frequently, each member of the group carried their own bags and bedding, though most of the time these items were stored in a portable alternate space they had created. Like their magical tools, they only retrieved them when needed. After setting up bedding for herself, Ash, and Frieren in their new quarters, Fern began assisting with simple tasks around the village. One of her assignments involved using magic to pull radishes from the ground, a job as straightforward as its name implied. While working, Fern couldn't help but strike up a conversation with one of the villagers, asking questions about the area. This village used to belong to another country before it was peacefully incorporated into the Kingdom of Esther. "What was it like back then?" she asked, curious. The villager, busy carrying bamboo baskets, looked at her quizzically. "I wouldn't know much about that," he admitted. "This land was already part of the Kingdom of Esther before I was born. But the older generation often says life is much better now than it was before." "Better how?" Fern pressed. "Taxes are lower now," the villager explained after a moment of thought. "In the past, people starved to death because they couldn't pay their taxes. That doesn't happen anymore." "Why?" "A small drop in taxes wouldn't make such a big difference, would it?" Quote. The villager smiled faintly and gestured toward a golden wheat field in the distance. "It's not just about the taxes. The kingdom sends special magicians to sow unique wheat and potatoes, and they cast strange magic from time to time. All we have to do is harvest the crops." Quote. Pointing to the expansive field, he continued, "Look at that magnificent wheat field. The yield is far greater than anything we had in the past. While most of it goes to the kingdom, they're generous with famine relief when times are tough. I heard that the population of this country has increased 6 or 7 times over the past century. Is that because people no longer starve to death?" Fern asked. "I don't know if that's the main reason, but it's part of it," the villager replied thoughtfully. "It could also be because people from other countries often flee here. Even in our village, there are people who escaped from the southern countries in the past. There are even people from the southern countries here." Fern was surprised that people from her homeland had fled so far north, all the way to this kingdom. Her gaze drifted unconsciously toward the direction of the capital, and a deep sense of respect swelled in her heart. "The king of this country must be someone as gentle and powerful as Master Ash," he murmured. "Although I do think this kingdom is impressive." "Is Ash really your standard for a powerful person?" Sign asked with a chuckle, amused by the unusual comparison. Fern ignored him entirely, leaving Sign to shake his head and turn his attention to the nearby villagers. With curiosity, he asked, "Is Master Vole a member of this village? Why does he stay there at the entrance all the time?" "Master Vole has a house in the village, but he mostly keeps to himself. He's very old now, barely able to speak clearly," the villager explained. "Still, he has protected this village for a long time. From demons, monsters, rebel soldiers, and bandits. No one really knows why he does it. Aren't you curious? He's never told anyone. And ever since the village became part of the Kingdom of Esther, such threats hardly ever happen anymore. But Master Vole still stays there, sitting alone at the village entrance, like a guardian angel. He's been there for as long as I can remember, even since I was a child." Quote. "A guardian angel," Sign murmured, gazing at the old dwarf's solitary figure in the distance. A pang of melancholy struck him, and he sighed softly. "It feels a bit lonely, doesn't it?" Quote. Even Fern, who rarely agreed with him, nodded silently as she stared at the old man's back. That night, while the rest of the group was asleep, Ash sat at the entrance of the village, practicing magic as usual. Opposite him sat Master Vole, their silent company broken only by the occasional rustle of the night breeze. For a long time, neither spoke, as if the quiet was enough. But then, after an indeterminate amount of time, Master Vole slowly opened his eyes and gazed at the young man across from him, a boy who felt both familiar and unfamiliar. Ash, the old dwarf began, his voice gravelly yet gentle. Why do you push yourself so hard? Quote. Without even lifting his eyes, Ash replied casually, why do you stay in this village, where almost no one knows your past? Quote. I've said it before, Master Vole answered, his tone carrying a hint of nostalgia. I'm just protecting my wife's beloved village. But you're already strong enough. Why do you still train and do such strange things? Strange, huh? Ash mused, not denying the claim. It doesn't feel like it's been that long since we last met, has it? Vole asked, his weathered eyes narrowing slightly. It's only been a dozen years, Ash replied. A small smirk tugged at his lips as he added, and you killed my monster. Quote. Master Vole chuckled softly. At that time, I thought I'd end up fighting you. No, he corrected himself, shaking his head. I thought you'd kill me. Quote. Ash sighed, his expression softening. You're too much. I'd never kill a friend just because of a monster. But what you were doing back then? It was dangerous, the dwarf said gravely. I suppose it was, Ash admitted with a faint shrug. Are you sure you won't harm the village? Quote. Nothing in this world is certain, Ash replied calmly, his tone as devoid of emotion as the old man sitting before him. If this village stands in the way of my goal, I can only eliminate it. If you destroy this village, I will find a way to bring you death, Master Vole responded without hesitation. Can you really do that? No matter how hard I try, these old bones are no match for a young man like you. Master Vole didn't feign bravado, but his resolve remained unshaken. Still, I have a promise to fulfill, one I made a long time ago. I won't live many more years, but until my last breath, I'll keep that promise. Keeping a promise. Ash repeated, his words carrying an air of emptiness. He paused briefly before continuing. I remember your wife was human. She's been dead for over 3 centuries. After all, you've been guarding this village for nearly 400 years. Have you ever thought of giving up? Master Vole looked at him with the same unwavering calm. What about you? Why do you engage in such dangerous pursuits? There are many reasons, Ash replied vaguely. Then just give me one, Master Vole pressed, his sharpness catching Ash off guard. Ash hesitated but eventually answered, I had a hard time as a kid. So I thought, if I'm going to live like this, I might as well bear my claws and leave my mark on this world. Something like that. Did it work? Quote. Partly, Ash admitted tersely. The conversation lapsed into silence, and Ash closed his eyes, retreating into his magic cultivation. But after a long pause, something stirred within him. Speaking of promises, Ash began suddenly, after all these years, do you still remember what your wife looked like? Quote. Master Vole was silent for a long time before answering, his voice tinged with both honesty and melancholy. To be truthful, I can no longer remember her face, her voice, or even her eyes. But despite that, I still remember that there was something important I wanted to protect. That's why, even if I have to fight an old friend, I have no regrets. Is that so? Ash said softly. He couldn't help but think it strange, to cling to a promise even after forgetting the person behind it. As if reading his thoughts, Master Vole shifted the subject. Ash, you're with Frieren again this time. What are you doing? Dragging her into something strange? Or are you finally planning to defeat the Demon King? Quote. Defeat the Demon King. Ash repeated, startled. What's wrong? Nothing. Ash quickly brushed off the question, though a moment of hesitation lingered. The Demon King had been defeated long ago. It was impossible for Master Vole, even in this isolated village, to be unaware of that fact. Had he truly forgotten the matter of the Demon King, and perhaps even the memory of his wife? Ash, what now? You don't seem like a good person, but neither are you a bad one. Still, I'm glad I could meet you again at the end of my life. Quote. You said the same thing to Frieren 80 years ago, didn't you? Ash retorted. Then I'll tell Frieren the same thing again when you leave, Master Vole replied without a hint of irony. You really are something else, Ash muttered under his breath. He glanced at the old man, who had closed his eyes again, standing as still as a statue. Ash couldn't fully grasp what was going through his mind. After a moment of inner deliberation, Ash chose not to press further. He paused his training, letting out a sigh as he looked up at the starry sky above. The night sky, unchanged for thousands of years, stretched endlessly before him. As he gazed at it, a question weighed heavily on his mind. More than 300 years from now, would he still be able to remember Fern? To be honest, even he wasn't confident. But now, Ash no longer regretted his decision to take in Fern. Even after all these years, he had unknowingly forgotten what his original friend looked like. And this feeling now wasn't because Fern was the descendant of that friend. 7 days passed in the blink of an eye. During that time, Frieren and Master Vol seemed to be enjoying their conversations about the past. When they finally departed, he mentioned dreaming of his wife for the first time in years, as if their discussions had brought some part of her back into his memory. Though no one could say whether he managed to recall everything about his wife through that fleeting dream. Even so, the dream left Frieren in high spirits as they departed from the village. However, once they were far from the village, she suddenly turned to Ash, her expression dimming with frustration. Ash, Master Vol, I think he really doesn't have much time left. Quote, is that so? He's forgotten everything about his wife, she said softly. The average lifespan of a dwarf is about 300 years. He's already lived past that by a wide margin, Ash replied matter-of-factly. It's hard to imagine him holding on much longer. Won't you be sad, Ash? Quote, birth, aging, sickness, and death are the eternal constants of life. There's no point in being sad over something inevitable, Ash said calmly. Then, as if shifting the conversation, he added, but what about you? Do you still remember what Flam looks like? Quote. Honestly, it's a little blurry. Frieren, who had been leafing through her book as they walked, unconsciously twisted a page, her expression tinged with sadness. Maybe one day, I'll forget what you and Fern look like too. Then just make new friends when the time comes, Ash replied with a light smile, patting her head. Let go of the past properly, so you can move forward. That's easy for you to say, Frieren muttered, her frustration bubbling over. She swatted his hand away, glaring at him before quickening her pace to walk ahead. Ash blinked, genuinely surprised, and turned to Fern. What's her problem? Isn't that a perfectly reasonable statement? Quote. This is Master Ash's fault, Fern said with a sigh. You should apologize properly later. My fault. Ash asked incredulously, pointing to himself. He instinctively turned to Sign. You're a priest, aren't you? You comfort people all the time. Surely you understand. That's the most practical advice I could give. Sometimes, Ash, I don't know what's wrong with you, Sign replied, scratching his head with a wry smile. You're supposed to be smart, but you somehow manage to say the worst possible thing at the wrong time. Quote, I understand it might not be pleasant, but wouldn't it be better to confront the issue instead of avoiding it? This way, we focus on finding a solution. But is there really a solution to something like that? Sign didn't argue further. He just shook his head and smiled bitterly, leaving the topic to drop naturally. Frieren remained sullen as they traveled, while Sign occasionally stopped to ask villagers about the whereabouts of his best friend, the self-proclaimed guerrilla warrior, who had reportedly passed away 10 years ago. His real name was unknown, and the peculiar nickname made it easier for some villagers to recall details about him. As they continued north, however, they stumbled upon a grim scene, scattered weapons and broken, lifeless bodies littering the main road. Is this bandits? Frieren crouched to examine the bodies, her sharp gaze quickly assessing the situation. Judging by the damage, it looks like the work of a magician. And quite an advanced one at that. Quote, I thought this country was supposed to be safe. Why are there still bandits? Sign muttered as he began collecting the bodies, the sight stirring unpleasant memories of his homeland. Ash glanced at him, shaking his head. What are you talking about? No matter how safe a country claims to be, no era is free of crime. It's impossible to completely eliminate criminals. Banditry is a business, after all. It's not surprising that people resort to it. As he spoke, Ash caught sight of Fern nearby, and his instincts kicked in. He reached out to cover the boy's eyes before he could see the corpses sprawled across the road. Chapter 106. Problem Girl Ubel. Ash's swift movements successfully prevented Fern from seeing the gruesome scene at first. However, from the conversation happening nearby, Fern quickly pieced together what they had discovered. Not at all pleased with Ash's overprotectiveness, she pouted and protested. Lord Ash, I understand your favoritism toward me because I'm from your country, but I'm not a child anymore. Could you please stop covering my eyes like this? I've seen murder scenes before, but this isn't good for a child's education, Ash replied calmly. I told you, I'm not a child anymore. Fern retorted angrily, pulling his hand away. However, when her eyes finally fell on the dismembered corpses before her, her face turned pale. Even so, she didn't react much beyond that. Though clearly unsettled, she managed to hold herself together. Ash couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief that she had grown stronger, and sadness at the realization of why. He thought back to Fern's childhood, recalling the wars she had endured and the many corpses she must have seen along the way. I always feel a little sad, he muttered unconsciously. Fern, startled by his words, looked up at him. What? Why? I'm not a child anymore, am I? Quote. For some reason, her defensive response made her look like a child caught in the act of doing something wrong, and Ash couldn't help but chuckle softly. Sign, observing the exchange, found himself puzzled. Was Ash sad because Fern had grown up, or was he mourning the dead bandits? When the thought crossed his mind that Ash might actually feel sympathy for the bandits, Sign shook his head repeatedly. No, that's impossible, no matter how I think about it. Ash raised an eyebrow, noticing Sign's reaction. Why do I feel like you've just thought of something very rude about me? Quote. Was it really rude? Quote. I don't know what you were thinking, but forget it. Ash sighed, deciding not to press further. He wasn't so fragile as to be bothered by unspoken thoughts. However, as their conversation continued, Ash noticed Sign squatting on the ground, cleaning up the corpses. He frowned. What are you doing? Your hands will get dirty. Quote. Sign glanced up briefly and shook his head. You know, sometimes your focus on things is really off. But they're bandits, aren't they? Quote. They're also dead, Sign replied without looking back. When a person dies, everything ends. At least as a priest, I can offer them one final mercy. Quote. But they may have done terrible things in the past, Ash countered. That's just a possibility, isn't it? Quote. But the likelihood is high, Ash said, studying the scene. Judging by the state of their weapons and the nature of the attack, they were probably killed in retaliation for a crime they committed. From that perspective, they deserved to die. Quote. Perhaps, Sign conceded. But as a priest, I can't simply ignore the dead. Ash sighed, shaking his head. You're a priest who drinks, eats meat, and loves gambling, yet you draw the line here. Even so, I'm still a priest, Sign replied firmly. Despite his vices, drinking, gambling, and a fondness for flirtation, Sign remained steadfast in his principles. His determination to bury the bodies surprised Ash. Seeing Sign's unexpected passion for his duties, Ash finally relented. He raised his hand, casting a spell. The scattered remains lifted into the air and floated toward a small wooded area by the roadside. With a second spell, Ash blasted a hole in the ground, deep enough for a proper burial. Even after the bodies were buried, Sign took the time to stack a small pile of stones to mark the grave. His meticulousness earned a quiet observer in Frieren, who eventually sidled up to Ash and whispered. I thought you'd just watch from the sidelines. Quote. Ash raised an eyebrow, glancing at her. I'm just as surprised that Sign actually knows how to perform the duties of a priest. No, Frieren said, shaking her head. I'm not surprised by Sign. I'm surprised by you. I thought you'd just sit back and watch until the end. Really? You must have a terrible impression of me. Remember to apologize later. Quote. Apologize for what? Frieren retorted, her tone both curious and annoyed. Then, after a pause, she added, actually, I still don't understand you. Quote. She glanced over at the purple-haired girl, Fern, who was imitating Sign's effort to build the makeshift grave. Fern probably feels the same way. Quote. Ash tilted his head, his tone turning slightly incredulous. Do you know Fern? Frieren narrowed her eyes at him. Are you underestimating me? Quote. No comment. Quote. What's with that expression? It's nothing. Please don't mind it, Ash replied curtly, turning his attention elsewhere. The conversation ended there, but Frieren continued to watch him, a mix of curiosity and frustration swirling in her eyes. More than ever, she found herself wanting to figure out what went on in his mind. After the brief interlude, the group resumed their journey. While Sign went into the village to inquire about his long-lost friend, Ash noticed someone unusual by the fence near the village entrance. It was a young woman, her dark green hair tied into an elegant side ponytail. She wore a black dress that perfectly outlined her graceful figure, neither overly ostentatious nor excessively modest. It struck a perfect balance, displaying her beauty without being too revealing. The top of her dress was high enough to avoid being called low-cut, though her figure made it impossible not to notice her natural allure. Her arms and thighs were adorned with bracelets and leg rings, which, rather than seeming out of place, added a unique charm to her appearance. Her purple eyes, while inherently beautiful, were dulled by an indifferent, lazy expression, what one might call dead fish eyes. Her demeanor, too, was anything but ordinary. She exuded an aura that was distinctly different from that of a typical magician. She feels like a dangerous person, Ash muttered after observing her for a while. It didn't take long for him to deduce that she was likely the one who had killed the bandits they had encountered earlier. After all, she was the only magician he had seen along the way. The girl, however, seemed utterly uninterested in the world around her. She sat perched on the fence, idly playing with a ball in her hand, occasionally yawning as she stared into the sky. Ash initially thought she might ignore him entirely, but as he continued to watch her, she suddenly noticed his presence. Without a word, she stood up, walked over, and sat down beside him. She leaned closer, studying him from bottom to top, her curious gaze uncomfortably close. "What are you doing?" Ash asked, his tone calm but wary. "You," the girl said with a lazy smirk. "You actually stood there, behind someone, and called them dangerous? I should say it face to face, then. Besides, it's the truth, isn't it? There are things you can say and things you can't, especially in front of the person in question. In the end, it's just." Before she could finish her sentence, Ash nonchalantly slapped her face, pushing her back and knocking her off the fence. The girl lay sprawled on the lawn behind the fence, her calves still resting on its edge, caught completely off guard by Ash's shove. "It's also black," Ash muttered absent-mindedly. From his angle, he accidentally caught a glimpse under her skirt, which startled him htly. Showing an unusual sense of consideration, he leaned down and pulled the hem of her skirt to cover the skin exposed to the sun. Then, bang! Without warning, an invisible slash cut through the air, striking Ash's arm. However, the attack merely tore his sleeve before dissipating into magic particles, leaving his skin unscathed. The girl, still lying on her back with her legs in the air, froze mid-reaction. Slowly, she opened her eyes and stared in disbelief at Ash's intact arm. Ash, unfazed, asked calmly, "What are you doing attacking a gentleman? Aren't you afraid of retribution?" The girl sat up awkwardly, her expression a mix of indignation and amusement. "That's my question. What kind of gentleman pushes a girl's legs over and then runs away? And you looked quite serious about it too." "First of all, I didn't look seriously. It was a quick glance," Ash countered, his tone matter of fact. "Second, I pushed you away because Fern and the others are in the village. What if they saw me chatting with someone suspicious and my reputation took another hit? If they weren't coming out soon, and if I weren't a warm, kind person, you'd already be dead." "Ha ha, Tilda, really scary," the girl replied, her tone playful. She patted the hem of her skirt and squatted beside him, resting her chin on her hands. A faint smile played on her lips as she teased, "But you're not a gentleman. That's not something a kind and gentle person would say, right?" "Being kind and gentle doesn't mean letting others walk all over you," Ash shot back, his voice steady. More importantly, the girl's tone shifted as she scrutinized him. "Why is your hand okay? What do you mean?" "I mean it should have been cut off," she said, her eyes narrowing. Ash smirked. "What a coincidence. I thought it wouldn't be cut off." Her brows furrowed, but Ash's sunny expression didn't falter. His demeanor was almost unnervingly carefree, like a boy basking in the light of day. In the world of magic, imagination was everything. Yet, imagination alone wasn't enough. It required precise techniques and exceptional control. The girl's cutting magic was undeniably advanced, the kind that even Frieren might praise. But the defensive spell Ash had cast on himself was even more refined, surpassing the upper limits of ordinary magic. It was a clash of techniques, where the stronger imagination won out. For the girl, this was unprecedented. She stared at him, momentarily stunned, as if unable to process what had just happened. When Ash turned away, seemingly dismissing her, she suddenly burst into laughter. Haha, you're hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. You call me dangerous, but you're clearly more dangerous than I am. You dismiss my abilities, yet you make me powerless. How absurdly funny. Quote. Her laughter subsided, but her mischievous grin remained. She licked her lips seductively, her red tongue gliding over her thin lips. After a moment, she extended a hand toward him, her expression bright and playful. I almost forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ubel. What about you, bro? Ash raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. You just tried to cut off my hand, and now you're introducing yourself. Didn't I already apologize by showing you my underwear? That's your idea of an apology. Quote. Well, you did forcibly push me over and then ogle me, didn't you? In that case, even if your hand had been chopped off, it would have been your own fault. Honestly, I'd say I showed you mercy. The girl, Ubel, kept smiling at him, and Ash found himself unable to refute her. In this world, where human life was often treated as worthless and death could come from even the smallest conflict, her playful provocation felt oddly out of place. What a pity, Ash said coldly, his tone laced with disdain. You're no match for me. So it's not you showing mercy, it's me showing mercy to you. His gaze flicked to the hand she still held aloft. By the way, aren't you tired of keeping your hand up like that? Isn't it you who refused to shake hands? Ubel shot back, her tone teasing. Or do you enjoy making a lady stand there like this? Or maybe what? Maybe you want to take another look at this. Quote. Ubel playfully swung the hem of her skirt, her smile deepening as she watched him. Ash met her gaze without flinching. After a brief pause, he nodded indifferently. If you're that eager to show me, I don't mind taking another look. Haha Tilda, you're really something else. Ubel laughed. But do you think I'd actually let you see it again? Quote. The human heart is hard to predict, and I don't like uncertainty, Ash replied flatly. So you're giving up? No, he said, his tone calm and matter of fact. I'm just helping you resolve the uncertainty, like this. As Ubel continued to toy with her skirt, Ash, clearly annoyed, reached out and lifted it himself with an expressionless face. The sudden chill under her skirt left Ubel frozen in place, her playful demeanor replaced with stunned silence. Taking advantage of her momentary shock, Ash clasped her still extended hand. I'm Ash, he said coolly. It's been a pleasure spending time with you. You've fulfilled your duties, so you can go home now. Kill you? Quote. After a long, awkward pause, Ubel tilted her head, her lips curling into a drunken yet menacing smile. Magic surged around her as she unleashed a flurry of invisible slashes, the attacks cutting through the air like blades. However, Ash's protective magic nullified each strike effortlessly, turning the attacks into harmless particles of light that dissipated in the air, just as before.
Additionally, if you would like to request novels and access my Google Drive where I have 200+ audiobooks, then you can join my Patreon. Link is also provided in the description.